the meeting today. First, I want to establish through roll call a quorum. So starting on my right,
Michael Savoy.
Jose Campos.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Deirdre Robinson.
George Familet,
Nancy Corrigan.
Alicia Verha.
Mary Jiang.
Sochi Leon.
Dan Jacobson.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines. Carola Nicholson.
okay, we have a quorum. Opening remarks, the CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority of the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. You may notice that our board members are referencing tablets during the meeting. The tablets allow the board members to more easily access meeting materials and are not being used to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item within the board's jurisdiction. Our first item of business is a resolution for retired California Board of Accountancy CBA member Youngsung Sunny Park. I am going to proceed by reading the resolution and we will proceed from there. Whereas Sunny Park was appointed by the Senate Rules Committee, she faithfully served as a board member of the California Board of Accountancy from January 11, 2017 through November 7, 2018. She served as a member on the committee of the Professional Conduct and California Board of Accountancy member liaison to the Peer Review Oversight Committee. Throughout her term of service, in all times, Sunny Park gave fully of herself and her ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. She has served as the president of the Orange County Korean American Bar Association and served as a tax advisor for the Korean General Consulate Office's Customs and Tax Advisory Committee. Sunny Park is the principal partner of Park and Asher Law, where she focuses on estate planning, gift and estate tax planning, family succession, and wealth planning. Now, therefore, it is resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Youngsung Sunny Park for the outstanding contribution she made during her term of service on the California Board of Accountancy and to the consumers of California.
I move approval.
Okay, will you have a vote?
Second.
Any members' comments?
I have a comment. I will be proudly voting for new Buena Park City Councilwoman, Sunny Park, I'll be voting yes on this. Very proud of her.
Okay. Public comment? Call for the vote.
Alicia Verha. Abstain. Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
Mary Jiang.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson.
Yes.
Sochi Leon.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Carola Nicholson.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
And Mark Silverman.
Yes. Motion passes. Okay. Our next item of business is the report of the Leadership Roundtable meeting regarding the responsibilities of the California Board of Accountancy activities for 2019. The Leadership Roundtable meeting was held yesterday, January 16th, here at the CBA office. The meeting provided new leadership an opportunity to meet with Executive Officer Patty Bowers and her executive team. During the meeting, we reviewed the planning meeting topics for 2019, and staff also provided an overview of the preliminary project list for 2019. The project list for the coming year is full with operational improvements, information technology upgrades, outreach, and many other items to further assist the CBA in meeting its consumer protection mandate. Leadership identified some priorities for 2019, including continued monitoring of the cannabis legalization of marijuana, including but not limited to collaborating with the Department of Consumer Affairs to engage in new administration and the new administration on this topic, and working with stakeholders such as NASBA. Continued implementation and work on AB 2138 related to the denial of licensure. Continued enhanced outreach activities, including expansion of presentations to the community colleges, and assign to the Committee on Professional Conduct the topic of CPE reciprocity. I appreciate the input and discussion yesterday and look forward to working with both Mark and Nancy in the upcoming year. Okay. The next item of business is the announcement of the California Board of Accountancy Leadership Award. And as part of the 2010-2012 strategic plan, the CBA developed an employee recognition program as a way to acknowledge the CBA staff for their dedication and efforts in assisting the CBA in meeting its mission to consumer protection. As a result, the CBA Leadership Award of Excellence was launched. 2018 was the 8th year the award was presented. Management evaluates all staff at the CBA and nominates those who best meet the criteria, some of which includes providing consistently superior service through interactions with CBA staff, clients, and other external stakeholders, creating and implementing innovative practices, techniques, or systems resulting in significant improvements in service, always exhibiting a positive attitude regarding work and coworkers. For 2018, the CBA selected 2 staff members who have met and exceeded these criteria. The first staff member was Malcolm Mitchell, who was recognized at the September 2018 meeting. The second staff member is Ben Lamb, who regrettably was unable to attend today's meeting, but we wanted to publicly recognize his receipt of the Leadership Award. Ben works in the CBA's mailroom and is key to assuring all incoming monies and documents are handled appropriately, processed quickly, and timely delivered to program staff. Ben is a hard worker and sets out ways to help others in areas with their workload and volunteers to help with special projects. Regardless of the work Ben has been doing, he has had a positive attitude and always has a smile on his face. Ben is a true asset to the CBA. He understands the CBA's mission of consumer protection and works hard in his role to assist us in meeting it. We have a certificate for Ben that will be signed by the CBA leadership, and it reads, "This award is being presented in recognition of demonstrated competence, dedication, and outstanding service in supporting the endeavors of the California Board of Accountancy in achieving its mission to protect consumers." Congratulations, Ben. Okay, and then in your materials, our next item D, there is some announcements around the new committee and liaison assignments, so I will have you refer to those if on your own time if you have any questions, and discuss those with myself or Patty. In terms of item E, discussion and possible approval of the 2019-2021 California Board of Accountancy Strategic Plan. We have Deanna Purse, the Assistant Executive Officer, who's going to give us some background on that.
Good morning, thank you. This agenda item is to present the California Board of Accountancy with its draft 2019-2021 strategic plan. The draft strategic plan captures the outcomes of discussions to develop objectives which occurred during the September strategic planning workshop. I would like to thank not only the CBA members for their contributions towards the strategic plan, but also the various committee members, consumers, and professional associations who provided valuable input on priorities for the CBA in the coming years. Provided in Attachment 1 is the draft strategic plan. As you review the information, we welcome any input and edits you may have and would like to specifically request input on the objectives noted which include Objective 1.5, Objective 4.7, and Objectives 5.1 and 5.2. To assist you in your discussions, we have included as Attachment 2 a status on the objectives from the 2016-2018 strategic plan for you to reference. Staff recommend the CBA provide any edits or suggested changes on the strategic plan and make a motion to approve, delegating to the CBA president any final changes that may be necessary. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I turn it back over to the president.
I guess I have a general comment to the other board members, that there are, as you go through that, there are recommendations of certain items to be taken out. It's my understanding that the staff gets together and sort of comes up with those recommendations. Obviously, if there's any comments or thoughts on those, feel free to, in your review of the document, provide any comments there.
I can, I know Patty was saying something. I didn't know if you were gonna say, address it. For anything that was taken out, was it just because it was obsolete or, I don't know, no longer needed, that type of thing?
Actually, on the items highlighted, the first one is on page 5,
Yeah.
item 1.5. We're recommending perhaps clarity on that item,
Okay,
so we can, just for clarity purposes, or to remove it, so it would be either one.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further comments, we could head on to item F, which is the discussion, excuse me, do we need to,
So we would need some dialogue on 1.5,
excuse me.
if members have any recommended rewording of
For
that
one,
item.
for 1.5?
It's item 1.5 on page 5, and it's at the bottom of the page.
Should remove it.
Yeah, what Mr. Campos said.
The next item, if we could get clarification on page 8, is item 4.7, to get clarification or consensus on removing the objective.
Should remove it.
I do have a, okay, so before that, I have a question. So does that just mean you wouldn't need recommendations from us or recommendations on to contact a stakeholder and, or to find folks to join the Board of Accountancy or to join any of our other committees?
So on the items that are identified, once the strategic plan is adopted by the board, then the next step is staff will assign each of the objectives to a staff person to implement during the next 3 years.
Okay.
So the objectives that we've identified that we're seeking clarity was to assist us in making sure that we could implement that item
Okay.
based on the feedback that the members
Oh, okay.
offered in giving us that item. So we just needed some clarity on what was expected with that item.
All right. Then what Mr. Campos said. Eliminate.
Okay. We have to remove it.
Thank you. And then the next one would be on page 9, under laws and regulations. Would be to approve those 2 items that were added.
I'm sorry, repeat that, Dan?
So when the draft strategic plan was put together, there didn't appear to be any objectives that fit under number 5, laws and regulations. So these 2 items were drafted and being proposed by staff to include.
And this was recommended by the Department of Consumer Affairs?
This was actually staff
Oh,
recommendation.
this is just a staff one.
Yes.
Okay.
When they got all the objectives together and placed them in the initial draft that was received by staff, there were no objectives that fit under laws and regulations. So staff proposed these 2 items for inclusion in the strategic plan.
Yeah,
So
my
these are
que-
inclusions, the other 2 are deletions.
Yes.
Perfect.
yeah, obviously, I think I would certainly suggest to include them. I think, given some of the other feedback we have in terms of reg packages and the ability to process those, assuming this would enhance that ability. So that would be positive from that perspective.
Thank you.
Mr. Campos?
Regarding 5.2, you think there's a path for that? I just, is that a, what's the realistic aspect of 5.2, frankly?
I actually do think there's a realistic possibility. I know that this is an item that's been discussed at the department level, and they're working on internal process changes so that they can move the packets more quickly through the department. So I do think actually it's realistic.
Okay.
And with that, those are the only changes that we wanted to highlight, and any input or any additional suggestions or objectives that the members may want.
Do you need a motion from us?
I'm sorry, ask a question, and I apologize for this, but back to page 5, number 1.5, review our enforcement process for firms of various sizes and their members to protect consumers. My recollection of this discussion was that there had been criticism that big firms were not being members of big firms were not being disciplined in favor of members of of small firms or sole practitioners. I understand we do have money set aside for big firms and what it would take to do that. But my further recollection was that we didn't have numbers. We didn't have any the data points necessary to decide if there was a problem. So I would recommend keeping it, just to get those data points.
And this is for the 5.1, 5.2? Which one are you talking about?
Page 5,
Okay.
1.5.
Oh, 1.5, okay, sorry. Thank you for the clarification.
Yes.
So we could provide statistical data outside of our strategic plan for members' consideration, but when matters come before us for investigation, they're handled on a case-by-case basis regardless of whether it's a small firm, large firm, individual. So we don't really categorize or target any specific groups. It's just a case-by-case analysis. So we could certainly give that information to the members. We have historically disciplined all types of individuals and firms just based on the violation that occurred.
So it sounds like perhaps this is too granular of an item to be included in the strategic goals. That being the case, yes, I do request that statistical information. Thank you.
Okay.
But just, well, I'll make a motion here. I would move approval of the strategic plan with the 2 deletions, including item 1.5 and item 4.7, and the 2 additions that have been included in goal 5.
Second.
Okay. Can you vote? Call for a vote?
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
George Famulett,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, so we're ready for item F then, which will be the discussion regarding the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy exposure draft, model rule 5-7. I will turn it over to you again.
Thank you. This agenda item provides the California Board of Accountancy an opportunity to discuss the recently released NASBA exposure draft, which proposes changes to the Uniform Accountancy Act model rules. to allow for continuous testing of the CPA exam. The proposed changes are included in attachment 1 of the agenda item. The purpose of the exposure draft is to inform all state boards of accountancy of potential changes to the Uniform Accountancy Act model rules, which I'll refer to as rules. The rules, similar to the CBA regulations, are intended to implement or to explain specific provisions set forth in the Uniform Accountancy Act. Although many of the CBA regulations mirror the rules, the CBA maintains independence in the establishment of its requirements. This exposure draft has proposed changes to Rule 5-7, which is specific to the Uniform CPA exam's 4 testing windows. Candidates may sit for any of the 4 sections of the CPA exam in any order, but presently cannot take the same section multiple times in one window. The proposed changes, as identified in the attachment, eliminate this provision, which will not be necessary under continuous testing. Because NASBA announced their intentions to move towards continuous testing prior to the release of the exposure draft, CBA staff presented members with amendments to CBA Regulation Section 7.1 at the November 2018 meeting. The CBA approved the amendments, which allows flexibility to continue to allow taking a section once during a testing window, but would also allow for continuous testing once fully implemented. And attachments to, the amendments to Section 7.1 are included in Attachment 3. Although the language for Rule 5-7 differs from CBA Regulation Section 7.1, they accomplish the same goal of allowing continuous testing of the CPA exam. In response to the exposure draft, CBA staff have prepared a comment letter, which is your Attachment 2, that supports the proposed changes to Rule 5.7. My goodness, I'm sorry, 5-7, got too many numbers going here, and identifies that the CBA has already approved proposed regulatory language to allow for continuous testing. Staff recommend approval of the attached comment letter. If the CBA decides any changes are necessary to the comment letter, staff recommend authority be delegated to the CBA president to approve the final letter for submission by the February 11th deadline. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Can I ask for a motion?
So moved?
Second.
Okay.
And I assume the so movement approved the
Approve
draft
of
comment
the
letter?
letter.
as
Yes.
presented.
Correct. Member comments?
I have a question. Do we know why the original Rule 5.7A2 was implemented?
It was implemented to ensure that candidates weren't taking the same test section during one window.
I understand, but do we know why? It seems to be a bit of a punishment.
I think it was probably for security purposes with regards to the amount of test items that are offered during that window. I wasn't here when that was put into place, but that's my presumption.
Thank you.
I guess I have one comment indirectly related to the motion in the sense of thinking through for the CBA to determine the impact on your resources if this were to pass and sort of people are taking tests in a different profile of time. Would it be something that would be problematic or not, or still going to be the same number of people taking it, I'm assuming, but I don't know if there's different cycles where people tend to be taking it right now and you see the license come through or not.
That's certainly something we can monitor once it goes into
Correct.
place. We typically have peaks of people applying for the exam, which typically occur after a graduation period, so in that May, June, and then December, January area. I'm not sure if this will impact those peak periods necessarily, but it's certainly something that we can monitor once it goes into effect and then report back to the board.
That makes sense. I mean, I sort of was just a question that occurred to me, sort of thinking about that. I would assume it wouldn't be that big of a change, but.
Yeah. I think
sort of-
I'm sorry. It's primarily on I think the retakes, people who
Yeah.
are applying if they haven't, passed it successfully on the first time. And the retake process is pretty streamlined with regards to what we do here in the office. So if there is an increase, it's very expedited here at the office, so I don't think it will create a huge resource issue.
Okay. Further member comments? Okay. Public comments? I'll call for a vote.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
and Mark Silverman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to our next item. We wanted to talk about, Rebecca Reed's going to talk about our 2020 proposed meeting dates and locations.
Hi. Item 1G provides members with a list of the proposed 2020 meeting dates and locations. CBA staff has selected the meeting dates to avoid major and religious holidays. For your reference, attached is the 2020 calendar, which reflects the proposed dates. And just to note, the Business and Professions Code 101.7 was amended effective January 1st, 2019, which now states that boards shall meet at least 2 times per year instead of 3 times per year. This amendment does not impact the CBA since the CBA meets 6 times per year. The CBA may choose to make a motion to adopt or modify the proposed meeting dates and locations. At this time, I would like to turn it back over to President Familet and would be happy to answer any questions.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Okay, any further comments from members? Comments from the public? All right, let's call for a vote.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Next item is item H, and we're going to have a presentation on information security practices for the California Board of Accountancy. Mr. Hanson is going to educate us on this topic.
Good morning, Mr. President and members. I'm Dave Hanson, the board's Senior Systems Administrator and IT Staff Lead, and I'm here today to provide you information regarding CBA's information security practices. And in the interest of time, I'll be presenting you with the overview of the information that's contained in the meeting materials for this agenda item. As I'm sure you are aware, the array of cyber threats facing all organizations has grown significantly over the past several years. News of data thefts, network and website breaches, malware, and denial of service attacks are now almost a daily occurrence. In this increasingly hostile environment, long gone are the days of treating cybersecurity as an afterthought. All organizations, no matter the size, must now treat cybersecurity as a primary operational concern. The Board of Accountancy is no different. Facing today's growing cyber threats is challenging, and made even more so because we are a fairly small organization with only a handful of IT staff. But fortunately, we are supported in our cybersecurity efforts by larger state organizations such as the California Department of Technology and the Department of Consumer Affairs. The CBA's IT infrastructure is a mix of systems and services that are deployed over externally hosted networks and our own internal network. Our public website and applications are hosted on a combination of DCA's servers and servers running on Microsoft's Azure cloud service. The systems that support our licensing and renewal functions, such as CAS, are maintained by DCA and hosted by the California Department of Technology. The systems that support our examination and initial licensing functions are maintained and hosted here by the board. In order to defend against cyber threats, we deploy multiple strategies and techniques. These are listed in your meeting materials as prevention, threat exposure reduction, threat detection, and testing and verification. Some of the prevention strategies that we employ include Our requirement that all staff use YubiKeys for two-factor authentication in order to ensure that staff have long, complex passwords. Our use of multiple firewalls and internally segmented networks in order to thwart or complicate attempted network breaches, or at a minimum, more easily detect and contain a successful network breach. Our use of long and complex passwords for connecting to our Wi-Fi networks, and our treatment of those networks as an external, potentially hostile network. Additionally, we are partnering with DCA to procure and deploy a common set of network and endpoint protection tools and applications as part of a department-wide effort to standardize and pool IT resources for cybersecurity. Some of the threat exposure reduction strategies that we employ include: we strive to limit the amount of data, the amount of application and licensing data that we collect to the minimal amount necessary to perform our consumer protection and regulatory functions. When it is necessary for us to collect sensitive data, that data is stored using industry-standard encryption, and staff access is limited to those with an operational need to know of the information. The deployment of parts of our IT infrastructure to external hosts, especially our public web services, also reduces the threat exposure of our internal systems. As mentioned in your meeting materials, threat or intrusion detection is one of the most complicated, expensive, and labor-intensive cybersecurity activities. While some threat detection capabilities are provided to us by the California Department of Technology, most threat or intrusion detection is left to individual organizations to perform. As part of DCA's department-wide security planning, we are partnering with DCA to perform intrusion detection scans and to procure and deploy tools and devices in order to improve our threat detection capabilities. Testing verification is vitally important in order to ensure the effectiveness of our cybersecurity efforts. CBA performs regular vulnerability scanning and partners with DCA for our public website vulnerability scans. And in the next few months, DCA will be providing the CBA with regular internal network vulnerability scanning services. Finally, the strategy of last resort, if all of our cyber defenses ultimately fail, is data recovery. We utilize data replication, we perform regular system and data backups, and use secure offsite storage in order to assure that we will be able to recover in the event of a successful cyber attack. In conclusion, I hope you found this brief description of some of our information security practices informative, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding this material or the IT operations here at the board. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
Thank you. Have there been any attacks?
Have there been any attacks? There probably have been attacks, to the state network. We haven't had anything successful. We've had malware on a few employees' computers maybe in the last 10 years, but nothing significant. That's like 1 or 2 people. And we've had someone, had an insecure email account, but that's it. We haven't had any breaches or serious attacks or denial of service attacks.
Good job.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
Just out of curiosity, have any other boards within the DCA been attacked, or anything we have learned from them that we can implement here?
Well, I mean, that is, like I said, since we're a small organization, it's hard for us to be aware of the entire environment. So the Department of Consumer Affairs is very good with sharing information and providing us with assistance, and that's part of their department-wide strategy now is to pool all of our resources and have common sets of tools. DCA did, I believe, in December, had a malware attack that was fairly significant. I don't believe it was successful. I think it ended up being more of a denial of service than actually a penetration of their network. But so it does happen all the time. I guess we've been lucky, or maybe our strategies are working. I mean, that's, as I mentioned, organizations of all sizes are being attacked. So it's hard to. It's a very tough job to defend ourselves these days. But like I said, the state of California is making a solid effort to secure its networks. We have a security audit coming up in May of this year. It's a very significant audit. It's done by the California Military Department, as I mentioned in your materials. It's quite extensive. Last time we had one was about 2.5 years ago, and we passed. We could have done better, but all of DCA did basically the same. We all probably got like a C+ grade on that score. This time, we're heading for, the intention is to go for A+. We're really hitting it hard, and so that's.
Thank you.
All right.
What is the California Military Department?
I know, I was surprised too. I didn't know California had a military department until they came to audit us 2.5 years ago, but it is a department of the state of California that is staffed by, National Guard and Reserve folks. So we actually have our own military in California.
Who knew? Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, to thank Mr. Hanson for his presentation, and we look forward to hearing about the positive audit results.
All right, thank you.
Our next item, going to have our council give us an update on our North Carolina State Board of Dental Examiners.
This will be super fast. There is no update.
Okay. In terms of agenda? Okay. Okay, well then the next is we're going to have,
He's on the left. We're going to talk about the head of DC.
okay. Yeah, the, sort of going to have to have a flexible agenda. The DCA director, Mr. Gruffalino, will be arriving shortly, so we're going to continue on, and when he does arrive, we'll sort of fit him into the agenda as we go through. And so with that, we are going to hear the report of the Vice President, Mark Silverman.
I just have one item today to recommend the appointment of Irina Oreshkova, CPA, to the Peer Review Oversight Committee. The PROC assists the CBA in an advisory capacity in its oversight to the peer review program. As with all appointments, I have verified that the individual has met the requirements for license renewal and has demonstrated the skills and knowledge to serve as a member of the Peer Review Oversight Committee. I recommend that Irina Oreshkova be appointed to the PROC effective January 17th, 2019 through January 31st, 2021.
So moved.
I second that.
Comments from other members? Public comment?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do know Irina very well, and she would be a very good person for that committee.
Oh, great, great. Excellent. Public comment? Okay, let's call for a vote.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Mary Jiang?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Carola Nicholson?
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
And Mark Silverman.
Yes.
All right.
Motion passes. Okay, so that concludes the
That's my report.
Vice President's report. Okay, well, next we are going to have the Secretary Treasurer report, and Nancy Kerrigan is going to provide us a report.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the current year budget, that being for 2018, 2019, is $14,503,000, and that's some $500,000 higher than the prior year to cover increased personnel costs. On July, I want to say June and July for some reason today. On January 10th, the governor released the proposed budget for 2019 and 20 of $16,098,000. In May, the governor will review the specific line items of the budget, make any changes, revisions, et cetera, and present those to the legislature to approve by June 15th. At that point, it goes back to the governor, 12 days to sign and become effective July 1st. And at our July meeting, we will have the details of that budget and be able to work with those. So that is my report with respect to that budget. And do you have any questions for me at this point? So moving on to agenda item 3B, we have a presentation from Mr. Robert De Los Reyes. He's a budget manager of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and he will be providing an overview of the budget process for us. Welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Robert De Los Reyes. I'm a budget manager over the Department of Consumer Affairs, and more importantly, I am the board's budget manager. Today, I have a brief overview of the annual budget process, and as well as an overview of what we do as the budget office for the board. There's some things that, some services outside, I would say technical budgeting that we provide the board as expenditure tracking, as well as fund monitoring. And I'm going to go over some of the documents and tools we utilize as an office in order to accomplish those goals for the board. So before I start, I have, hold on one second. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. There you go. Before I start, I have a brief overview of the topics that we're going to go over today. I'm going to start with a brief introduction of the budget office, really kind of our main role to how we serve the department and why we exist. And I have a graphical representation of the annual budget process, kind of how that falls within a fiscal year, and really explaining the three main phases of the annual budget process. After that, we'll talk about how a budget's built, and we'll wrap up in terms of how the responsibilities we have as a board and how we have to spend within our budgetary means, and really what we do as the budget office to help you with that. Okay, so for the first slide is the introduction of the budget office. So really our main role is to facilitate the annual budget process for the department as well as the board. The three main phases of the annual budget process can be explained as shown on the screen. So the first stage is when we build the budget. So that effort kicks off during the fall. And once that budget is built, as the board member just mentioned, the governor releases it every January 10th. And once that is released, the legislature now has its turn to review our budget and make any changes or recommendations to that budget and may invoke those changes. Once those are done and those are accepted, the budget becomes law, also known as Budget Act. And once that budget is in law, we are all responsible for spending within those budgetary levels. So this is a flow chart to just really describe it in graphic. So really those three main boxes are those three main stages. Right now we fall within that between the first box and the second box where it says governor's budget. Right now we're engaging discussions with the legislature and their representatives, excuse me, in terms of our budget and any budget adjustments that were made during that process. Just to remind everyone, we operate in fiscal year. Fiscal year starts every July 1st, and we end every June 30th. We always build a budget in advance, so right now we're in current year, fiscal year 2018-19, and we're building and proposing the budget for fiscal year 2019-20. And just to highlight an important date, so the legislature has until June 15th to review our budget and make any recommendations. Once the review is done, it goes back to the governor for his signature, and that is how we get a budget into law. And once that's into law, then really it kicks off the next fiscal year, and we're responsible to adhere to that budget and not spend anywhere above that amount. Okay, so before we get into the main segment of my presentation, which are the different tools we utilize in the budget office, I just want to go over briefly to how we build a budget in California. As I stated, the governor by law needs to submit a budget to the legislature by January 10th. How we build a budget is called incremental budgeting. We don't start from scratch. We take your existing level of funding as our baseline, and we would incrementally adjust that budget accordingly. We adjust it by a variety of means. Statewide budget letters. So statewide budget letters are instructions that are disseminated by the Department of Finance. So the Department of Finance is the fiscal governance for California. They're the ones that give us instructions to how we should incorporate certain changes that were, or increases that happened during the time your budget was enacted previously to now what we're building into fall. For example, some budget letters apply to retirement rates that increase each year, different salary increases that may be negotiated by the bargaining units that represent our workforce. We want to make sure that the board's budget is equipped to handle those increases. So those budget letters that are submitted by or disseminated by finance, we receive it as the budget office, and we would incorporate those changes for the board. Secondly, more of the traditional approach, the budget change proposal process. So this is a way for the board to make a direct change to their budget. So if you have a resource need in enforcement, licensing, if we need to address workload increases, funding shortfalls, this is the way you would make a direct change to your budget. We would have to craft a budget change proposal and justify it to the administration in order for that change to be incorporated in the governor's budget. And lastly, the legislature, as I just mentioned, also has the power to make those changes as well. So once we propose that budget to the legislature, they also have the power to make those changes as well. So that could also be an incremental adjustment that we have to make to your budget. Okay, so with that said, we do have a responsibility to adhere to those levels. And some of the things we do as the budget office is we provide two main documents to the board. You should see the documents in your packet. The first document here, it looks like this spreadsheet. It's our financial year-end projection document. This is a monthly expenditure document that we provide the board and board staff to keep them apprised to how they're spending their money. And the second document that I'm going to go over today is a fund condition. And it should look like this here. So this is also another tool we use to really gauge before a major financial decision to ensure how that affects your fund. Okay, and before we jump into the financial year-end expenditure document, I just want to give a brief definition of what is a budget and really the main components that make up a budget. So a budget is an amount that's appropriated out of your fund. So just think of it as the board just writing a check for the whole fiscal year, and that is the level of spending that you are limited to for that given fiscal year out of your fund. And really, that's the bottom line figure, but we also categorize that spending to help us track how you spend that money. And we really track it in three main ways. So the first main section that makes up a budget is your personnel services. Fairly straightforward. This is where your salary and wages comes from your employees, your benefits. If you hire temporary help to help with seasonal workload, this all comes from this area of your budget. Secondly, the operating expenses. It's your overhead to support your employees. More importantly, enforcement costs that come out, or any general overhead that may apprise your budget, like general expense, communications, postage, or rent costs for your facilities. And third is reimbursements. So reimbursements is a mechanism to offset some of your spending. So we can tag a portion of your budget to be reimbursed by an outside entity. For example, more of the popular reimbursement items are fingerprint services. So if you provide fingerprint services as a board, you would expend costs and would be reimbursed by the licensee you're servicing. So it would be a direct offset to your budget. And we would identify that amount in your budget that will be offset by that relationship. Also, there's unscheduled reimbursements that could result from an enforcement case, that where you could recoup some of the costs that are expended through that case, and it would be an offset to your budget for that given fiscal year. Okay, so to the year-end projection document here, I'm just going to explain how this works. Really how we start here is really that fourth column. It's called budget stone. So that is your bottom line budget. That is broken out by the various budget line items that we use to help guide and categorize your spending. So right there is your budget. From the left and right to that, from the left of that budget is your prior year expenditures. We usually give 1 year, but, just to address the new accounting system, so I'm sure you're all aware that we've recently transitioned to a new accounting system called Fiscal. Some of the challenges and limitations of the system are providing monthly information in a readable format that we're all used to seeing. Today, kind of what we're doing to mitigate some of that uncertainty is that we have the ability to manually go into the system and extract thousands of data out of the system. So what we do as the budget office, we would have to filter that and really isolate it down to the board's costs. That's really what we have to do in order to report monthly expenditures to the board. Until we get a format that's readable and that is trustworthy, that is currently what we're doing to make sure that Patty and Deanna are apprised to what they spend each month, is that we really have to manually mine the information out. And that is to the right of that budget stone there. That is your current year expenditures. So that is the resultant product of our data mining, is that we use that as an indicator of what we're spending. And we would use that in a combination of a few things. Oh, excuse me. Yeah.
Well, I just had a quick question. Oh, sorry. This microphone. How would you deal with an unexpected expenditure? So, I mean, a couple of years ago, we had issues with air conditioning, or if there's flooding or in the building or whatnot. How do you deal with that recommendation going through, especially if it's a significant charge?
Sure. It's case by case. Usually when it's unforeseen, it's hard to plan for it. But typically, a traditional approach is to be conservative in your spending, kind of in the beginning of the fiscal year. What I've been taught, about 3% is usually taught to say, okay, if you have a 3% reversion, that would be at least enough to kind of address some of that unforeseen spending kind of towards the end of the fiscal year. But there's also options and mechanism within kind of the budget process that we could use and explore if that's the case. So if we have an unforeseen expense that is well beyond our budget or anything that we could do in terms of redirecting funding, there are options that we could use as the deficiency request process. So we would have to justify the unforeseen nature of that expense to the governor, and he could increase our budget in the current year. But we would want to exhaust all options before that. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
If I could just add on to that, one of the things that we've done here at the Board of Accountancy is, as you all know, we're planners. And so, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, for example, like on the move, when we were kind of amping up for that, we were able to put money away into our architectural revolving fund, our ARF account, so that we could kind of save that money for moving purposes. Knowing that we were going to be needing a lot of new equipment and supplies once we moved, we really strategized at the beginning of the year to ensure that we had sufficient resources in place so that we could make those purchases towards the end of the year. So we really work hard internally. We have a budget analyst, a budget manager, myself, and Patty, who work internally, and then we're in constant communication with the DCA budget office. So to the extent it can be planned ahead of time, we do plan and take that into account and are very cautious and conservative on our spending.
So we have a rainy day fund essentially for Board of Accountancy. I don't know if other boards have that type of thing, since, yes, we are dealing with a bunch of CPAs plan, but I don't know if other boards do that too, and are as efficient.
Yeah, so just to tag on to Deanne, yeah, I mean, for the cost that we could plan, we absolutely do that with the board. And Patty and Deanne, you guys are lucky to have them. They're absolutely very attuned with their budget and do a great job in engaging with us in discussions in terms of planning for costs. But in terms of the rainy day fund or the architectural revolving fund, that's only specifically for facility costs, for tenant improvements. If you want to move into a new location, we could put money aside in the current year to help for some of that, knowing that, moves are, could stretch over multiple fiscal years.
Thank you.
Yeah? Okay, so just to come back to the projection document, so some of the basic concepts we use to help project some of these line items are One, ultimately, we work with Patty and Deanne to see if they have any estimates for the year. Because right now, what you're looking at right now is fairly raw. It's our first projection document for the year. So we're engaging in discussions with board staff to help refine a lot of these projections. But mostly, it's done by using prior year trends, prior year information that we have available, board estimates as I referenced, and really at times straight line methods to where we could straight line costs for 12 years. If that best represents that line item, we could also provide that as well. When you get that, you take a look at all the way to the right, the furthest column to the right, you get your unencumbered balance. And again, red is okay. Red is okay as long as when you tabulate it, you stay within your level. It just acts like a basic household budget to where, you know, if you don't travel a lot and you have a lot of money for gas, you could always use that to offset other things in your budget, as long as you stay within your means. So that's really the unencumbered balance. And when you take a look at the projection document, we're projecting that the board will spend close to its full budget and revert approximately 1%. So it's going to be, you know, I'm not concerned, but it's going to be tight. Any questions on the projection document before I proceed? Okay. Okay, so the next segment is the fund condition. So my goal here is just to wrap it up to see how your budget is a small cog in terms of how we monitor your fund. And I just want to best explain it as best as I can in this segment here. So how does your fund relate to your budget? So again, your budget is an amount appropriated out of your fund. Okay, so it's really just like your checking account. You're just setting yourself a limit to how much you could spend each year. And really the main funding components that comprise a fund condition, you always start with the top. So the fund condition they have in front of you is what's publicly displayed in the governor's budget or in the Department of Finance's website. You start with a beginning balance, and the beginning balance is really what your fund balance was the previous fiscal year. So what you're looking at here is 3 years, which is the previous fiscal year, 17-18, the current year, 18-19, and budget year upcoming 19-20. Okay, so the beginning balance, and we take any prior year adjustments into account. So what is a prior year adjustment? So once an appropriation is set, and once it's finished, that budget is open for 3 years. Okay, so if there's any late invoices or any changes to interest rates that may be charged that specific fiscal year, we could always go back and change it. So our accounting office could go back and make a prior year adjustment, and it would appear in that fiscal year that adjustment is done. And it will be adjustment to your beginning balance. Okay, so once you get your beginning balance, we take your revenues in account to what you would collect in renewal fees, cite and fine, application fees, and take that in account with your beginning balance. Then you compare that to what you would spend in a given fiscal year. So looking at this, the 1111 item is your budget. The rest of those items in the expenditure realm there in the fund condition are direct assessments to your fund. So those are entirely done by the Department of Finance. And just to kind of explain a few, so the 8880 item there is the fiscal assessment. So that is our share as a state program to what we pay for the new accounting system. And just to explain that awkward -4 there, that is a credit to us because finance or Department of Finance did over allocate or overcharge or over assess our special fund agencies to the state. This is their way to pay us back. So just to explain that negative number there. The other one's a supplemental pension payments. So a few years ago, there was a $6 billion transfer of state funds to CalPERS as an opportunity to make money. This is the board's share of that loan to be paid back. And again, it's not only accountancy, it's all state departments across California. Okay, and the last one is statewide pro rata. If you're familiar with how we recoup costs as a department, is through pro rata. And pro rata is a representation of your share of our costs. So statewide pro rata is more on a global scale. So those are costs related to the governor's office, the state controller's office, the legislature. They also need to allocate their costs in a similar fashion. They're not self-sustaining like the board to where they bring in their own revenue. They would have to allocate those costs through a variety of means. And that's primarily done for statewide is the size of your budget in comparison to the state's budget. Okay, and a few things I want to note. So there was a figure that was identified as the upcoming fiscal year. It was about 16,098,000. I just want to address that discrepancy in this fund condition. So that is true to where that is the board's budget. This number you see here in your fund condition for the upcoming fiscal year represents the net appropriation. So the net appropriation is when we take what will be reimbursed out of that budget as reimbursements. So that is the difference between the $16 million figure that was identified earlier and to the figure that you see here in your fund condition, is that we just take reimbursements in account. And with that said, this is the tool that we use to really gauge major financial decisions. We could customize it, we could alter it in terms of if we know a foreseeable cost that may come in, we could stretch this out to multiple fiscal years in the future, and we could gauge it to see how that will affect your fund. And this is something that we use from a monthly or weekly basis, depending on what's on the horizon. For example, a new IT solution for the board to help gauge kind of if we can afford it or not. And just to wrap up, there's a few things that I want to mention in terms of your fund balance. So again, your fund reserve is your surplus in your special fund to support your board's expenditures. And really how we gauge that is months in reserve. So how months in reserves act is really we get your fund balance, and in an event that revenue stops, that is an indicator to how many months you could survive without any revenue coming in. Usually, there's really no, there's no law indicating a floor for the months in reserve you should retain in your fund, but there is a ceiling that some of you are fairly familiar with, is the 24 months in reserve. So once we approach that threshold, we start working with Deanne and Patty to see what our options is to address that. Typically, 3 to 6 months is a rule of thumb to have in your fund. Usually that's the threshold that we look at. If you go anywhere below that, we start engaging discussions with Patty and Deanne and the board to ensure that we have things in place for the future to avoid a insolvency. So with that said, that is my presentation, and I can answer any questions that you may have. I could take it.
Thank you for
Yeah.
the great presentation, how you develop budget. So I remember you mentioning that you start your budget with current years or prior years department budget, and then you add or subtract. But normally, if every year you start that, now, does that provide, and you add to it, does that provide incentive for departments to save money? Because if they don't, use up their current budget, they don't get more money for the next year. So is there incentive to save, or or I hear sometimes, okay, we have some money left at the end before fiscal year, let's spend it. So that way they keep their budget limit and get increases. How does that take into consideration?
Sure. So it's not necessary if you don't spend your budget, you're going to lose it. But I would want to address and acknowledge that it is a part of the decision-making process. So when the governor or Department of Finance reviews your budget and your request, they would take into account what you save each year. And they would ask the question to say, oh, well, looking at last year's budget, you reverted or saved about $500,000. Is there a reason why you can't use that money for the resource request that you are putting forth in this budget? Typically, what we would have to do is really qualify where those savings are coming from. So if those savings are coming from vacancies, right, those vacancies will be filled, right? So those savings really can't be used for anything new. But just to answer your question, it's acknowledged in the decision-making process, but you don't lose out entirely in terms of requiring additional funding for an upcoming fiscal year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I saw a question over here to my right.
I have
Yep.
a question regarding the fund balance, the months in reserve.
Sure.
From the prior year, we have a 21.6 months in reserve. Current year, we've gone down to 15.7, and it's projected to have a 10.8.
Mm-hmm.
The trend seems to be going down, so are we going to have a problem 2021?
not a concerning problem, but we have engaged the board with discussions of options to address what we call that structural imbalance, to where we're spending a lot more to what we're collecting. And we have a few options on the table. I believe that will be mentioned sooner than later.
So we actually have a fee increase going through the regulatory process currently, which will assist in that. And then in prior years, we also did receive loan repayments, loans that we made to the general fund, and so we saw a significant increase at that time.
Sure.
On the screen, this page shows a projection of 99% of the budget, whereas the one we have here has 97%.
Yeah.
What's the significance of those two different?
So that's, I can mention that, I missed that on my presentation. I was telling Patty I was going to address it. So just kind of how I talked about, we're refining our projections. So when I made my PowerPoint presentation and submitted to Patty, there were talks after that. So what you see in front of you is more of a fine projection to what I had in front of me when I did my PowerPoint presentation. And I apologize for that difference. But yeah, that is the difference. And what you see in front of you is more of the accurate picture of what you would spend as opposed to what you have in your PowerPoint slides. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
So we get a lot of great information in regards to our budget, but how does this compare maybe to a similar board, or are there any, again, back to benchmarking, and what can we learn from others relative to the great work that this board is doing?
That's a great question. And, you know, I haven't run that exercise myself in comparing accountancy, and depending on what we're looking at, right? And again, you know, I also want to commend Patty and Deanne again. They're definitely, you know, excellent officers in terms of budgeting. We talk, you know, on a monthly to weekly basis if need be. But in terms of the budget, every board and bureau is unique. They have their unique set of circumstances. They have their unique set of challenges. So it's really hard to compare dollars, right? Just looking at dollars and compare to another budget. But yeah, to answer your question, I haven't really provided that or done that exercise to give you a good answer. Sorry about that, yeah. Any other questions? Okay. If you have any other questions, feel free to route them through Patty and Deanne. I'll be happy to answer them through email or any other means. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yep.
You're done? Okay, so I think we're complete with the treasurer presentation, so we are going to skip back and hear a presentation from the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. And Dean Raflino, but thank you for taking time to present today. I will turn it over to you and allow you to provide your background that you feel is relevant for the discussion at hand.
Thank you, President Famoulet. Let me first start off by saying, well done, Mr. De Los Reyes. I can imagine how intimidating it may be to give a budget report to the California Board of Accountancy. If you're expecting that kind of expertise and insight from me, you are going to be sadly disappointed. Nonetheless, I'll start my formal remarks now. President Famoulet, as I said, Vice President Silverman, Executive Officer Bowers, and board members, good morning. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to provide a brief department update to the California Board of Accountancy. First, I'll start off with some highlights specific to 2018. I'd like to recap some of the great work done last year. This past year, we convened 9 licensing and enforcement work group meetings, 3 substance abuse coordination committee meetings, 4 directors' quarterly meetings, pro rata work group meetings, and 2 directors, board member, and advisory committee leadership teleconferences. My family often asks after my day, what'd you do today, Dad? And I tell them meetings, and now they know what the answer always is when I get home, being now just shy of 2 years over at DCA. They sarcastically ask, your day, Dad? Meetings? These activities not only brought us together to promote open dialogue among the department's boards and bureaus, but also promoted collaboration to further our mission in protecting California's consumers. Thank you to the board and board staff for participating in these convenings, specifically Executive Officer Bowers for your active engagement in the pro rata work group and board staff in contributing to the licensing and enforcement work groups. Specific to our annual report, I invite you to take a look at DCA's 2018 annual report for a much more comprehensive view of the department's achievements. The report contains statistical and financial records of the work that the department and its boards and bureaus have achieved over this past year. When you have a moment, I encourage you to visit the DCA website and take a look at the document. Specific to last week's budget briefing by the governor. As many of you know, each year on the 10th of January, the governor releases a budget outlining his fiscal priorities for the state. This past week, immediately following the budget release, the department hosted a teleconference with board leadership, executive officers, and bureau chiefs to discuss the governor's 1920 proposed budget and to review proposals within the budget specific to DCA. That was the first time during my tenure that we did this. I thought it's very useful. Naturally, given how huge the state budget is, it's always, I think, it can benefit our programs to have a more specific explanation of the budget that pertains to DCA and obviously our programs. I know understanding how the governor's budget translates to your individual budget is a top priority. So I want to reiterate, as mentioned on the call, that our fiscal operations has scheduled individual program meetings in the coming weeks to discuss individual budgets in much greater detail. It's my understanding that the Accountancy Board had their meeting this past Monday with our budgets unit. Specific to mandatory sexual harassment prevention training. This year, 2019, is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year for the Department of Consumer Affairs. This means all employees and board members are required to complete this training this year, even if it was completed last year. This training is online, interactive, and can be completed at your convenience. If you have questions about this or any of the required trainings during your tenure as a board member, please contact our Office of Board and Bureau Services for assistance. I know that you've seen, thank you. I know you've seen her here many times before, but I just want to point out Karen DeHorace Nelson, who is Assistant Deputy for Board and Bureau Services, and she'll be more than happy to assist in this regard as well as others. Specific to Sunset Review hearing. As one of our 10 programs undergoing Sunset Review this year, I'd like to personally wish you the best and hope that the board has a smooth Sunset Review. The department is here to offer our support and assistance with whatever you may need during this process. Our legislative affairs staff are available to you for any guidance or preparation needed for your Sunset Review hearings scheduled this February, including conducting mock hearings or reviewing your questions and responses. It's my understanding that the board has requested a mock hearing and that one will be scheduled soon. This will be my second year going through Sunset Review in the sense that in 2017, when I first came on board, literally sunset hearings were happening that week. I guess they didn't want to put me in front of the legislature literally my first week in my tenure. I felt last year's went smooth with the department, the programs that were subject to sunset last session. I feel went smooth as well, and I'm optimistic that this board's will go smooth as well. Nonetheless, I think it's very, very important, like so many things, that proper preparation occurs. Again, fully confident that's going to be the case for this board. This concludes the department update, and as always, if the department can be of service to the board, please let us know. Thank you for your diligent work and valued partnership. I'm happy to entertain any questions not specific to your budget, because Mr. De Los Reyes took care of that.
Questions from members?
Yeah, curious on Breeze, and I know you had this rollout, some boards went on, we didn't. What's sort of the general update on that front, in terms of, even for those boards that went on to it, how's it going?
Yeah, so let me take your question in maybe different order. Let me first state that as I understand it, Bowers, maybe you can enlighten and remind where this board may be specific to its business modernization plan. Don't know if you've started kind of stage one or not.
So we've started initial discussions with the department on our transition to a business modernization project, but the real work will begin in July of this year. And it'll be a multi-year process to actually implement that. So right now, we're in the process of internally and externally securing the resources that we'll need in order to embark on that project.
Appreciate that insight. The reason I wanted to ask, because I didn't want to kind of jump ahead in my response, meaning that in contrast to how some of the programs got onto Breeze, this program, as well as others who have yet to select their new IT platform, rather than, again, kind of obligating programs to get onto Breeze, in conjunction with the California Department of Technology, obviously DCA, obviously this board, there'll be different stages in order to first assess what in fact is needed, unique to this board, specific to an IT platform. Again, in contrast, rather than saying Breeze is the right platform for you. What's needed for this board, specific to IT, may in fact be unique and different to, the 37 different programs at DCA. So as Patty was mentioning, kind of the first stage is really getting a true assessment of the unique work processes of this board. With that understanding, and again, in conjunction with the California Department of Technology, then we'll move into kind of step in stage 2 and 3, so that the process will identify appropriate options specific to an IT platform, as opposed, again, I know I said it now my third time, as opposed to just saying Breeze is the one for this board.
Okay, further questions?
I'd just like to thank the director for coming today. Your presence is certainly appreciated and noted, and we look forward to working with you as we have been for many years.
Great.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. I wish I could come to many more. For folks who did hear me first address this board, maybe not nearly 2 years ago, I've yet to figure out how to be in multiple places simultaneously. Once, in fact, I do, I will share that with everyone. Nonetheless, in all seriousness, I enjoy my role. I enjoy the collaboration that is absolutely essential in order for the effective administration of this board, and don't be surprised when you see me the next time. Naturally, I hope it is more frequent than it has been, so appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Garfield, very much, presentation. Okay, we're gonna move on to our agenda. We do not have an update from the executive officer, so we're going to go to item 4B, review and approval of proposed changes to the California Board of Accountancy Member Guidelines and Procedure Manual, and we'll have the Assistant Executive Officer give us an update on that.
Thank you. The Guidelines and Procedures Manual is designed to serve as a reference guide regarding the functions of the CBA and its committees. And we bring this to the board annually and provide any edits and updates and give the opportunity for the members to provide any input or ask any questions that they may have. So what you have before you, we have done the edits or made in track changes and are identified by underline and strike through. And I'm not going to go over every change, but I wanted to highlight some of the more substantive proposed changes. But I'm happy to answer questions regarding any changes that are noted in the manual. On page 6, we've revised the summary regarding the practice privilege program. We have throughout the entire document omitted references to the Strategic Planning Committee and removed that from the GMP manual. The development of the strategic plan has been occurring with the full board in place, and the updates have been provided to the full board, so we didn't feel that that committee was necessary going forward. Starting on page 17, the enforcement program information was updated to ensure consistency with other CBA-prepared documents, and Mr. Franzella will be covering this in more detail during his presentation on the enforcement process a little bit later in the meeting. We've added references to statutory and regulatory provisions where appropriate throughout the document, and we have made updates to the acronym list at the end of the document. There were other minor, non-substantive changes made to just improve the overall clarity. We have spelled out most acronyms just to ensure clarity throughout the document. And we have updated the overview of the CBA to make it consistent with other publications, including the Sunset Review Report and the annual report, and that's noted on page 5. I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have regarding any of the proposed changes. Otherwise, I turn it back over to Mr. President.
Questions?
Deanne, I just have 2 typos.
Oh, yes.
The perfectionist on page 17, 01, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph down, third line. Second word is
Yep.
and I think it's superfluous.
Thank you.
And then, on page 20, there's the 5 listed things, and then under there, there's a paragraph, and then there's another paragraph. And the first line, members, has an apostrophe, and I don't think it's supposed to have an apostrophe.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Ms. Burrow?
So just page 9 under tenure, where it says any member after the administrative hearing can be removed by the governor for neglect of duty or other cause. So is that just for governor appointees, or would the speaker or the Senate rules be able to withdraw their own person, their own appointee?
It applies to everyone.
Okay, so the governor, even though I'm a speaker appointee, the governor could withdraw my, withdraw, or pull me, all right. Thank you very much.
Staff would recommend that if the board approves the GMP manual, then make a motion to approve it.
Okay, so I think we have a motion.
Move to adopt.
Move the CBA to approve the January 2019 version of the GMP manual.
Second.
Any further comments from members? Any public comments? Okay, let's call for a vote.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay, moving on then, item 4C, discussion regarding planning efforts to the transition to electronic publication and distribution. And Mr. Bone was going to give us an update on that.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. Good morning, members. The purpose of this item is to provide that update on our transition and planning efforts to move to a primarily electronic publication and distribution of the update newsletter. As you may recall, in the July 2018 CBA meeting, the board approved a proposed statutory change to make that transition effective. Further, the CBA approved statutory changes to require licensees and applicants to provide an email address to the CBA. Both of those statutory changes were included and have been requested of the legislature through our Sunset Review report. And if those statutory changes are approved, those would take effect January 1 of 2020. Staff anticipate launching the electronic publication and distribution of the update on July 1, 2020, coinciding with the timeframe for all licensees to provide the CBA an email address. On page 2 of the agenda item, it discusses our preliminary activities and associated timeframes to facilitate the collection of emails and transition to an electronic publication. As you will notice, activities are already starting and will continue until that launch. I'd welcome any questions or suggestions that the members may have as we embark on this project, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the members?
I have a question. Aaron, so
Yes.
when, I guess, getting CPAs to give you valid email addresses and hopefully keep an update as they change, what do you do when you're gonna disperse this update via email and you're gonna, if it's invalid, it's gonna reject? So what do? Do you follow up to send it, or do you wait until you get a valid email address?
So that's a very good detail that we look forward to working through as the plan continues to take shape. But we plan to have a robust communications program to make sure that our licensees are aware, including whenever part of the statutory language that the board approved would require that licensees at the point of, every renewal, they would need to provide or perhaps affirm that, yes, this is our email address. So there's some checks, we think, that we hope will make the process easier for when people's email addresses do change, we can keep up with them.
I have a
Okay.
question. Can you please remind me, did we agree to completely eliminate the printing of update? I
No,
think it says here, primarily electronic publication. So will it still be printed?
that's correct. We will still allow individuals to opt in to receive a printed edition and mailing of the update. And I believe the board's direction at that time was to require licensees to, I believe perhaps on a semi-annual basis, to reaffirm, yes, I still do desire to receive a printed notification. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's not any further questions, I think we can move on to the next topic. Item 4D, update on the California Board of Accountancy's Communication and Outreach Program, and Mr. Bone is going to provide us an update there as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of quick highlights from the Communications and Outreach Report. I won't repeat everything on there for the sake of time. Following our prior CBA meeting in late November, Mr. Savoy spoke at Golden Gate University as part of their 7th annual Braden Leadership Speaker Series. His topic was Leaders Born or Made. And I think we had an enjoyable Q&A, would you say, Mr. Savoy, with the audience members?
Q&A actually lasted longer than the actual talk, so.
Usually does.
And some of the questions were unbelievable.
Yeah.
You have to stop and think. You just can't throw out answers, so it was quite, it was good. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
As did I. Last month, the CBA launched its online credit card payment system, which also allows licensees to submit their renewal application and peer review reporting forms through email. Coinciding with this, in addition to our communication efforts, staff consolidated all of our payment options that are available, including the fee amounts and links to the related forms, and placed them onto a single web page onto the CBA's website. We think that this increases the visibility of that information and is more convenient to applicants, licensees, and stakeholders.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have used it.
Wow.
I agree with the expedited aspect of it.
Right, a
Good.
consumer, fantastic.
Good.
All
Well,
right.
it takes a village. I cannot take any credit. On April 11th, the CBA, at the invitation of California State University San Bernardino, we will be there co-hosting an outreach event with them on their campus. Last year, we held a very successful event at the same location. Mr. Campos spoke at that event, which drew more than 100 students and faculty from that college as well as surrounding colleges in the region. And it was such a hit, they asked us to come back. So more details will be forthcoming as planning continues. That will be April 11th of this year. Finally, Mr. President, staff continue our work to possibly hold a student outreach event and board meeting. We're looking at possibly the September 2019 CBA meeting on the campus of Cal Poly Pomona. Again, many thanks to Ms. Corrigan for making our connection there with the university. The accounting department is excited to have us there on campus, and we will provide further updates as progress continues. Those are my remarks, Mr. President. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any additional questions, Mr. Bone? Okay, with no further questions, thank you very much for your presentation. We will move on to agenda item 5, the report of the Enforcement Advisory Committee. And we will have Mr. Rosenbaum provide us an update on the Enforcement Advisory Committee.
Good morning. Joe Rosenbaum, Chair of the Enforcement Advisory Committee. We held our last meeting on December 6 in Fullerton. Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines was in attendance and provided us an update on the board's activities and answered questions that some of our members had. And at this time, we also conducted 3 investigative hearings at that meeting. At this time, I'd also like to thank our Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines as well as Katrina Salazar for being our liaison in 2018, and of course, welcome Mr. Jose Campos and Nancy Corrigan, who will be our liaisons going forward. Our next meeting will be in Burbank on February 7th. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions from the members?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't think we have an update from the Qualifications Committee, so we are going to skip to peer review. And Mr. DeLizer will give us an update there. Yep. Dominic is going to, okay.
Thank you. Mr. DeLizer had an appointment he had to attend to today, so I'm going to provide the PROC report for the December 7th, 2018 meeting. The PRC held its meeting here in Sacramento on the 7th of December. The PRC would like to extend its appreciation and thank you to Ms. Nicholson for attending the meeting and providing an overview of the CBA's activity for both the September and November 2018 meetings. At the meeting, the PRC members reported on various oversight activities that took place between August 17, 2018 through December 7th, 2018. Additionally, the PRC discussed and provided feedback for its draft 2018 annual PRC annual report. The PRC discussed changes with formats and focused on other issues, especially delays with peer review related reports and publications and statistical information due to the AICPA's transition to what's called their PRIMA system and its impact to provide what are normal annual reports that the PRC looks at. The PRC will finalize and approve the draft 2018 PRC annual report at its meeting next month for presentation at the March 2019 CBA meeting. The next PRC meeting will be held February 15th here in the board office. With that, I'll happy to turn it back over to members and answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Any questions from the members? Okay, with no further questions for the members, we'll move on to the next agenda item 6, and I guess we'll have Dominic stay where he's at, and he's going to provide us a report of the enforcement activity.
Thank you. So item 6A is the enforcement activity report, and the report for this meeting covers fiscal year 2018-19 data as of November 30th, 2018. So beginning with, I'll just highlight a handful of things, and beginning with the complaints received, looking at pages 1 and 2 of the report, for fiscal year 18-19, the CBA, through those first, 5 months, had received just over 1,100 complaints. Members will notice at the bottom of page 1, we are starting to highlight unlicensed activity. This was a request of members that rose out of strategic plan. Right now, it's just a brief set of statistics. We are working on providing and developing a more comprehensive statistical overview, potentially similar to how we handled fingerprint information for a period of time. We'll extrapolate, the data will be aggregated in everything you have, but we'll pull out that data so you can look at it independently as well, incorporate, and we're hoping to incorporate that into the next report. But for the first 5 months, we've received 155 complaints that are classified as unlicensed activity reports, or unlicensed activities. So moving on to page 3, and investigations. A total of 1,500 investigations were closed during the first 5 months, with just over 1,000 being closed within the first 6 months during the first 6 months period of from complaint open to closure, so they were closed within 6 months. Additionally, 1,300 cases were closed within the first year, so this represents about 88% of the total closures are done within the first year. Also, the CBA has seen a decrease from the last report for average days to close from 162 to 152 for this report, so we're continuing to see a downward trend in that area. Moving on to page 4, and investigations pending. This is an inventory of pending cases based on the age of the cases. Nearly 72% of the division's cases are less than 6 months old, and 79% are less than a year old. We're continuing to try to make significant efforts to close the complaints as promptly as possible, so we don't end up where we were a few years ago with cases, I believe, 135 cases over 24 months. As of this report, we have 39 cases over 24 months, which is a 46% reduction to the same period last year, where we had 72 cases. And so, since the last report, we closed 11 and accrued 10, so we're still staying ahead of that mark and hope to continue to see it go down. Pages 6 through 9 deal with discipline. Beginning on page 6, the CBA has referred 27 matters to the AG's office so far through this fiscal year. And page 7 highlights the cases pending at the AG's office. And again, this inventory continues to decrease. At this point last year, we had 102 cases pending at the AG's office. At this point, we only have the 62, so almost a 40% decrease in our inventory at the AG's office. We have 3 cases over 24 months. One, as members know, has been on here since probably before many of you were appointed to the board. So it is a very old case, and we're waiting to hear, it's waiting to be scheduled for oral arguments, I believe, before the appellate court. The other case is one we have set for hearing, and we're trying to obtain settlement. Otherwise, we're prepared to go to hearing later this year. And the other one, the third case, is an active investigation that we're working with the AG's office on. Moving on to page 8, disciplinary orders. Through the first 5 months, the board has taken action on 33 matters, with obviously the vast majority being stipulated settlements. On page, page 10, I'll highlight citation and fines. The CBA has issued 238 citations so far through the first 5 months. This is nearly double what we issued all of last year. And the primary violation, 190 of the violations of the 230 citations we've issued are the result of the 20 and 12 yearly CE requirement. And I believe we're on our 3rd or 4th violations for some individuals that we're trying to resolve. Finally, with probation monitoring on pages 11 and 12. As of November 30th, the CBA has 160 probationers. As we're continuing to try to refine the probation monitoring statistics, we have continued to increase transparency related to probation violations. That can be found on page 12. And those were, during the first 5 months, we've had 20 probation violations that we've detected. Again, it could be one person with 4 or 5 of them. It's not representative of 20 individual people, just 20 different types of probation violations we have identified. With that, I'm happy to turn it back over to the president and answer any questions members may have.
Any questions from members? Yes.
Thank you, Dominic, for the statistical data. So I'm looking at fiscal years 16, 17, and 17, 18. I do see a slight decrease in number of cases that's, go through investigation enforcement. Do you predict that 18, 19 will be less? I mean, is it a downward trend which is good for the CPA profession? Or is it you see trending going upwards?
Do you mean in the number of complaints?
Yeah.
In the number of complaints, they appeared to be pretty steady this year, maybe a slight increase compared to prior year in terms of the volume of cases. Over the past few years, we've been right around 2,700 to 2,400 cases, or 2,400 to 2,700 cases, so I expect we'll probably be in that same range. And right now, we have been able to close a high volume of cases that have come in. We probably had a lot of administrative type cases in terms of CE violations, failing to respond to inquiries, things of that nature, that we're able to close quickly. So the inventory on the back end is staying low. I believe it's one of the lowest points I've ever seen at 780 cases. Usually our inventory is at around, I want to say anywhere between 900 to 1,200 cases. So that's a positive sign as well. So I don't expect the complaint numbers to go down necessarily, but hopefully we can keep that inventory at that lower level.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if the profession is overall behaving fairly well. I mean, I don't want to see the numbers increases, is what I'm saying, hopefully.
I wouldn't say, like, if you look at statistical trends for the past 3 or 4 years, you'll have seen a massive spike in the number of disciplinary actions, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily representative of the profession doing bad or better or worse. We had a backlog of cases that we needed to get through, and we went from around 30 cases of discipline to 60 to 90 so that was just getting through those inventory spikes, and hopefully we're starting to see more of a leveling off, and this is kind of where we'll be going forward.
There's been a lot of changes, right? I mean, you've got fingerprinting that was retroactive to a lot of the population you didn't have. You've had changes in stuff that people have to comply with. CPE seems to continue to be a dilemma here that people are having a hard time complying with. And you've got growth in licensee population. I mean, so it's hard to go apples to apples across all those periods, I think. I would just, Dominic, one question that I have for you is, incredible job, obviously, and it's been a trend over the last couple of years here in terms of being able to deal with the backlog. A lot of that was sheer brute force at the beginning. How do we feel about the sustainability of the processes that we have to sort of keep on this trajectory of continuing to make progress?
I feel very positive. The parts we put in place, again, there was some initial, we just had to throw bodies at the issue and kind of work diligently to kind of get and address the backlog. But concurrently, while we were throwing people at it, we were also refining all the processes to try to find out more efficient ways to do things and staying on top of not making decisions at appropriate stages involving the EAC earlier on. So I believe we're well positioned to continue this and continue to see improvements. And then one of the next steps will be, as we continue to deal with this business modernization, its overall impact and improvement to case management as well, because it'll be more, right now we still have to draw a lot of our reports manually through and then compile them and extrapolate them out of an antiquated system. There'll be more at our fingertips to kind of go through. So I'm not concerned about the future projections of maintaining this and actually seeing improvements, continued improvements.
That was a secondary question. I didn't ask it of our IT, but so there isn't really a system per se then for case tracking currently, and is it housed at the CBA right now, or is it elsewhere?
So we have one main system, CAS, that handles everything. What we then do is supplement it with our own, and mostly through Excel spreadsheets, is a lot of ways of what we do. We have case management tracking sheets that help us, but there's nothing we have where I can literally just hit a button, bring up that particular case in my office and look at it, and see where its progress is. So those will be the next steps as we deal with business modernization that will help us improve and provide increased accountability. But what we end up doing now is we have case reporting forms, and that we, staff update those, and then we can pull them at any time and take a look at where we're kind of at, make informed decisions, and take next steps on cases.
Further questions?
I commend the efficiencies that are being observed, especially on the investigations, and, it's reassuring to hear that it's sustainable
Thank you very much.
and that you're not leaving any bodies.
Great. Okay, without further questions, then we will move on to item 6B and talk about, have Mr. Franzella present on the enforcement process and petition hearings.
Thank you, and I'll keep my comments brief, as I know we're coming up close to needing we have the petition hearing, and that's time certain, so I'll keep my comments relatively brief. So for item 6B, you have two attachments. Attachment 1 is the overview of the enforcement process, and attachment 2 is the petition hearings. These documents, well, historically, the board receives a lot of information on its quasi-judicial responsibilities in a myriad of places, either through the Department of Consumer Affairs, board member training, the new member orientation that staff put on, various other documents that staff prepare, the guidelines and procedures manual being another document. And so what staff decided to do was try to synthesize this information so it'd be consistent across all the documents that staff provide to the board members. And so for each closed session set of materials you have, there's, in addition to the pink sheet you have a cover sheet that says the disciplinary process. The attachment 1 is going to be used to replace that going forward. It's designed to now provide members a more comprehensive idea of how a case got before you. It provides general information on how the board investigates its complaints, what some of the options were, how it proceeded to formal discipline, and then it also provides information on closed session activities, specifically the board's discussions during default decisions, stipulated settlements, and proposed decisions. And so this document will be provided going forward with all your meeting materials, kind of as an information-only document in front of all your closed session materials. I was only going to highlight a couple of areas within the document itself. I'm happy to answer questions members may have, but the areas I was going to highlight begin on page 7, and they're really associated with the closed session activities of the board. Related to its formal discipline process, and these are the default decisions, stipulated settlements, and proposed decisions. Staff working with DCA Legal Counsel and the AG's office pulled this information together so it provides members an understanding of what your roles are, what information you would be presented with during each one of these particular types of enforcement actions, and what role DCA or staff play in closed session, and what advice members can receive, and types of questions that should be geared towards making decisions. So with the default decisions, again, the defaults result from individuals not filing a notice of defense after an accusation has been filed or failing to show to hearing. These happen fairly regularly. About 20% of the cases the board sees are default decisions. And you'll receive the accusation, the decision, the default decision in order, the evidentiary packet, and the memorandum from legal counsel summarizing the cause of discipline and the recommended actions. CBA members in this particular situation are required to make their decision on the record. Neither staff nor the Deputy Attorney General's office is present during closed session matters on defaults. This is to ensure compliance with the APA, especially related to the ex parte communication. And members are really needing to make their decisions solely on the record in front of them. The questions that DCA Legal responds to generally are legal advice and procedural issues, not so much about the investigation itself. As for stipulations, these are the vast majority of closed session materials the board receives. They happen in about 75% of the cases. After an accusation is filed, an NOD is received, we work quickly and diligently with the AG's office to try to determine if settlement is available. When we do reach stipulated settlement, the members will receive an accusation, the settlement itself, generally a letter from the Deputy Attorney General who worked on the matter advocating for the settlement, and a memorandum that I prepare, or my staff prepare, and that I sign, related to the allegations within the accusation, the terms agreed to by the party, and costs. The board is in a position to speak more freely and ask more questions related to stipulated settlements, and part of that is because the ex parte communications are waived as a function of the stipulation. We are able to discuss more freely those particular matters, and in closed session, I present those. The Deputy Attorney General is available, as well as Ms. Bowers, the Executive Officer. And finally, with proposed decisions, this is when a matter has a notice of defense. We were unable to reach settlement, and it proceeds to hearing before an administrative law judge. The administrative law judge will hear evidence, weigh evidence, and issue a decision, a proposed decision for members' consideration. This is by far the least frequent type of decision enforcement action the board receives. I want to say it happens in roughly 5 to 10% of the cases you will that come before the board. The board has a broader range of options related to those. We've outlined what actions are available to the board on page 9. There's 5 time-sensitive and specific actions the board has to take, one of those 5 actions within the 100 days. For that material, what the board ends up having before them is the accusation, the proposed decision, and a memorandum from CBA Legal Counsel summarizing the findings and proposed decision. And again, similar to the default, the board is needing to make its decision solely on the record before them, which is primarily just the accusation and the proposed decision, and legal counsel really only provides advice on legal issues and procedural questions. And again, staff are not involved in closed session to ensure compliance with ex parte communication. With that, that's all I was really going to cover on the enforcement overview process in the interest of time, but I'm happy to turn that back over to discuss or to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you. Questions from the members?
Okay. So the other one, even briefer on the petition hearing process. Sorry, go ahead.
One quick point of clarification on the bottom of page 7 on footnote 7. And I know this is a kind of a tricky way to say things. It says in that footnote, the assigned in-house counsel represents the CBA members and not the executive officer or enforcement staff. Where it says CBA members, I know this is a tricky way to say it, but I just want to be clear that I represent the board and not the individual members. So the board as an entity. So just the way that it's phrased there could be read either way, and I just wanted to be clear that it's the board as an entity and not the individuals. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Mr. Franzello, did you have further comments then?
I'll just make an adjustment to the footnote. This document will be evergreen in nature as things change, as processes evolve, if there's law changes, if there's other things that go on, we'll make adjustments to the document. We're not necessarily seeking board approval on the doc and bringing it back all the time. It's going to be more evergreen in nature, so I'll just go back and correct that. But as for the other document, the petition hearings, attachment 2, one of the other primary function the board performs related to some of its enforcement activities is the petition hearings, whether or not that's a reinstatement of a license, reinstating some element of a restricted license, or a reduction of penalty, which is basically a modification of probation. And so we've developed this document to aid members in understanding their roles and responsibilities and kind of provide some initial guidance as members consider particular petitions. This document will be provided with, whenever we have a petition hearing, it'll just be on the, in front of all the petition documents, just so members can get some understanding of what their roles and responsibilities are during that particular hearing process. I'm not going to go into any specific detail unless members would like. I'm happy to answer any questions members may have.
Okay, any questions from the members on the petition hearing documentation? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. In interest that we do have a time certain in the afternoon and maybe channeling past President Savoy and efficiency, we're going to try to cover a few more topics moving forward. Item 9, report of the licensing chief. We're going to have Ms. Sanchez come up and give us a activity report. Thank you.
A lot of documents today. Okay, thank you. I'm here. Sorry, my voice is a little rough today. Good morning. I'm here to present the licensing activity report, which reflects statistics through November 2018. Okay, so as stated on our cover memo, we have revamped the licensing activity report in an effort to better display the workload within the licensing division, along with providing more real-time statistics. As we progress through 2019, it is expected that this report will continue to evolve, and I would appreciate any feedback today from members. Moving on from the cover memo, attachment 1 is the new licensing activity report. I'll begin with the division highlights. Since the release of the credit card system, several hundred applicants have successfully renewed online. Internal processes have been implemented to ensure a seamless transition for licensees as well as staff. Additionally, 2 staff attended outreach events in November where they assisted attendees with CPA exam and licensure questions. Finally, as part of the oversight responsibility of the CPA exam, CBA has the opportunity to evaluate the security measures performed by the Prometric testing sites as they administer the CPA exam. There are 2 programs that we employ. First is an unannounced site visit at a Prometric location. Second is you pose as an examination candidate in order to observe the administration of the exam. So we actually take the exam or a section of it. You don't have to finish it, by the way. You can, and we won't score you. We won't tell anybody. Staff will send a letter to CBA and committee members seeking interest in performing either type of visit in the coming months at the 22 Prometric locations throughout California. Additionally, on page 1, we have placed a snapshot which covers the first 5 months of the current fiscal year. This highlights the total number of applications and stakeholder inquiries received for the entire division. So the full number is at the top in bold, and then it's broken out either by percentage or actual numbers for each of the units. The qualifications committee meeting is next week. That's why there's no report today. So we'll be giving a report at the next board meeting. Moving on to page 2. Page 2 reflects the exam unit statistics, examination unit. The chart on the top, I'm sorry, I greatly apologize. It must be rough to listen. The chart shows the current and 2 previous year statistics, identifying the number of CPA exam applicants that have been approved. So this top chart is the approvals for first-time and repeat sitters. Again, sticking with the grand total and breaking it down individually. Moving on to the highlights. Unit staff have been working very hard to maintain a processing time of 30 days and below. We've been quite successful. The first bullet references December 19th. However, I can provide more up-to-date numbers. When I did my talking points here, as of January 11th, staff had completed applications received up to December 26th, which is a processing time of 16 days. So with all the improvements in the exam unit, we have been seeing a trend of between, I'd say 9 and 17 is about the range that we're staying in the exam unit for first-time applications. The second and third bullet highlight the number of applications received and approved. And if you notice, they have increased when compared to the previous year at this time. Also included in this report is the NASBA CPA exam performance summary for the second and third window of 2018. There are two parts to each quarterly report, a California-specific report and an all-jurisdiction report. These are in your attachments as 2 and 3. Okay, moving on to page 3. This begins the statistics related to initial licensure. Similar to the exam chart, this chart reflects the current and 2 prior fiscal years, identifying the number of CPA and accountancy firm licenses that have been approved. So again, this is an approved chart with the main number in bold and split out below. So far this fiscal year, we have approved over 1,800 applicants for CPA licensure, of which 470 were given the authority to sign attest engagements. Unit staff are currently processing applications below our goal of 30 days. Again, your statistics on the report reflect December 19th, but sticking with a more recent number of January 11th, staff had completed applications received through December 17th. This is a processing time of 25 days. What that means, I would also like to add here, is that not only are new applications received at the CBA at the 25-day timeframe, it's also those applications that we may have received additional documents or the aging applications. Those are also processed within the 25 days. It's that same number. We are running those two pathways, trying to keep them at the same number, being very similar. So that takes care of both areas. The second and third bullet highlight the number of CPA applications received and approved, which have increased, again, when compared to previous fiscal year at this time. Moving on to page 5, we get into our license renewal statistics. The first chart shows the total number of licensees renewed for this and the 2 prior fiscal years. The 2 following charts reflect the number of renewals that have been reviewed by CBA staff, CE audits that have been performed, the number of enforcement referrals found through the reviews that we perform, and the number of retired applications received and approved. The last page of the report reflects our current population, which stands at a grand total of 107,319 licensees and registrants. That concludes my report. Again, I appreciate any feedback, and I will now turn it back over to the president.
I have a question.
Questions from the members?
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. I do appreciate you giving us this oral report, knowing that you're not feeling too well.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
I had a question on page 5 regarding the retired status.
Yes.
Why would some of these not be approved?
There are requirements for retired status. For example, you have had to have been a CPA for a certain number of years. You'd have been active for a certain number of years. It also depends on any disciplinary measures that may have been taken at the time of the license. So in those cases, we wouldn't be able to grant a retired status.
Okay.
They can continue to go active or inactive,
Okay.
and that's typically what they do to maybe then meet those requirements, and then a lot of times they'll come back and go retired.
Thank you. And then what is the need for retiring a license? Why not just have it be inactive?
I think that at the time of the discussions, when it was originally, there was a lot of robust discussions with the board, putting that retirement in place. There was a call for it in the industry. I think a lot of CPAs would prefer CPA retired versus CPA inactive. A symbol of notoriety that they've put in that work for that time and have reached that.
Get it. Thank you.
Yes.
When looking at page 5, the run rate for licenses renewed looks kind of low.
For licenses renewed?
Yeah, 16,000 relative to 44, the overall prior years. Yeah, it's 5 months, but even when you double it and you add some more, it still looks low. Is there something going on, or why?
I can look into that. I can see what the differences is and look at the trends. Now, because renewals are based on birthdays, we do have some high months and then some low months. So I can actually go back and maybe do a little bit month-to-month look to see if that is, if typically within the first 5 months of an
There's some
odd
seasonal.
year, we're higher or lower.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking at attachment 2, page 2. When we're talking about the CPA exam, it says the second top 3 jurisdiction, and it looked like California has the most candidates, but when you look at the highest pass rate, California's not there. Do you have any idea what California pass rate might be?
What the California pass rate is?
Yeah, because Utah, Wyoming, and Wisconsin have higher pass rate in the 65%.
Okay, that is a little bit higher than ours, yes. If you go to the first page of attachment 2 in the top right, where it says section performance, the first page of attachment 2, top right, it'll say first time re-exam. It gives a number, a score, and a percent passage rate. So California is about 53.54% pass rate for first timers and 50.81% for repeat test takers.
But this is a national exam, so is our rates less than some of the other 3 high stakes then?
We're 29th.
Yeah, we're 29th out of 55. I do have a document that shows the pass rates for all the jurisdictions that I can provide to you at a later time or under separate cover. So it is very interesting to see where we do fall with the number of exam candidates that we have.
I have another question, a follow-up question to Ms. Young's comment. Have we examined why we are 29th? Why our pass rate is lower than more than half of the?
At this time, we have not inquired in this forum as to why we are at a 29th rating. Of course, it is specific to pass rates and students getting through college and passing the exam. We haven't explored it, but it's always an opportunity to find something like that out. Be very interesting.
Yeah, I would be interested in something like that, some information regarding that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know that they're monitoring the exam pipeline on the national level with regards to the volume of candidates, and we've seen some decrease in prior years. So perhaps that's something that we could reach out to NASBA on to see if we can get some additional information on the national level to see if that could maybe inform that question.
Okay,
Thank you.
that'd be helpful. Thank you.
So I got
Yes.
a question on, so I appreciate the updates and I guess the progress and improvements we've made on trying to clear through this area. I still hear from folks, particularly new entrants to the profession, right? People who want to take the exam, so initial exam, on the length of time it takes to hear back from the board. Now, some of that might be dated, because they may have applied sometime in the fall or in the summer, and it took a while, well beyond 30 days for them to hear. And it sounds like that's changed, and that maybe we're down to a 2-week or plus type of setting. And so that's good, if that's what I think the statistics you were, I couldn't tell if the stats were cumulative in terms of what we have, and so we've cleared through backlogs, or if these were just new, applications we were receiving. So if that's the case, then that's great. But I guess my real question, both for initial exam and initial licensure, where there might be issues, let's say that assumes a clean application, that assumes we're gonna approve it, and I guess we'll give them a decision of some kind. But in some cases, they'll hear back and it's gonna stay until they fix something. What is our process of communication? Is this snail mail that goes back to them to figure that out? Or is this email communication? How are we, because personally, I mean, my ability to get to snail mail is fairly limited. And it might take a lot longer before I take action on that, right? So what is our process for people who are sitting on hold for one reason or another?
Through our work groups that we had recently in September, October, it was decided that all communications for applications that include an email address will have their letter emailed to them. So each applicant, that is another major improvement. We have heard back from applicants much faster. We've been able to reconcile applications sometimes immediately, because some applicants are very responsive via email. We also, if they request, we can absolutely put something in the mail to them, but email has been a really great improvement and one of the high impact changes that we made within the organization. We do that for exam and initial licensure both. So when we receive information back, if the application is still with the analyst as they're finishing it up, of course, they'll reconcile it right then. If they have to mail us something, for example, when it comes through our mailroom, it gets assigned to the file, and that is also tracked to be processed under the 30-day time frame. We try and keep both new documents received as well as new applications on the same timeline and on the same process. If they can also email all their documents back to us additionally, so they don't have to mail it back to us.
Okay, that's real helpful. One question, and maybe it's in the report and I don't see it, is are we tracking that population of initial CPA exam and initial licensure in particular that are sitting on hold for one reason or another?
We do track them. We have, due to our regulations, we have to archive expired and old applications. So once a year, we go through, and any that are over a year expired, they get a reevaluation before we expire them out and try and reconcile anything we see. But on a more daily current basis, the applications that are sitting, if anything comes in, like I said, we attach it. Otherwise, we are waiting. We are waiting until they respond to us with their additional information. It could be a class, it could be the PETH exam, ranging to a class, ranging to experience. So some may take 6 months to get back to us, and some may take, a day.
It might be helpful to have some information about what is sitting in that state that, I guess could eventually expire. I mean, you can't do anything with it, but as we see sort of what is out there, and then maybe we have to think about, are there outreach messages? Now, these in some cases aren't licensees yet, so they're not getting all the normal communications, but then we've got to think about outreach. And I know when I interact with professors, this is a big constant source of discussion, especially initial exam items. And so how do we think about communicating with professors or others who are interacting with students in those ways? And so getting some stats around that. I think we had some before in the old, previous thing, but it seems to have dropped off here, so.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And if I could just add in a little bit of clarification to a couple of the questions you had, Mr. Campos. As far as the backlog versus these timeframes associated with just new applications, both have been resolved. So there is no backlog that exists for applications under or over 30 days. So the backlog is gone. So the 30-day or less processing timeframe would apply to any application, new coming in, or a pending application and additional documentation is received to resolve the deficiency. And then the other adjustment, so if you're receiving negative comments that processes are taking too long, I certainly hope those were from last year. If not, then those certainly could be directed to me, and we can make sure that we're following up with those individuals. As far as previously, when we would report statistics to the board on processing timeframes, we did that on an average. So we took the entire population of the applications that we received for the reporting timeframe, and we would give you an average processing of 30 days or less. We've adjusted that tracking, and we're no longer relying on averages. We're actually tracking real time for each application. So previously, someone could have been in that process And if 10 applications were processed very quickly, you could have had outliers, and that individual was experiencing longer wait times. So that no longer should exist either. And then the last clarification, no, actually, I think that was it. So I just wanted to offer that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
So I just wanted to add about mail, just for a general knowledge, that if something is sent through the United States mail, and as opposed, then there's a presumption that it was received. If it's sent through email, and if there's a presumption that it was received, then the receiver has to prove that it wasn't received. If it's sent through email or probably FedEx and that sort of thing, then there is no presumption, and it's the sender that has to prove that it was in fact received.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. We're going to try to get through just a couple of short items here real quick before the break. So we're going to jump ahead to item 11, meeting minutes. If you could, our meeting in San Diego. And so this is going to be the approval of the minutes from that meeting. And so can I get a motion to adopt the minutes of the November 15th, 2018 CBA meeting, specifically agenda item 11A, which includes non-substantive edits that were noted after the minutes were received?
So moved.
Any other further comments from members? Public comments? A call for a vote?
Alicia Verhel?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Mary Jiang?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Abstain.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson?
Abstain.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
And Mark Silverman.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Can I get a motion to accept the minutes, specifically agenda items 11B through F, which include non-substantive edits that were noted after the minutes were received?
You mean through E? Is there an F?
I've got E.
B through.
B, C, D, and E?
B through F.
I don't see an F.
I don't see an F.
There's no,
Is that it? Okay.
Unless I didn't see it.
E will do.
it's
If it's B through E, then I move
Okay,
it.
so it is B through E.
I move to accept.
And I second that.
Comments from members? Comments from the public? Call for a vote?
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson? Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Abstain.
Dan Jacobson?
Abstain.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Mary Jiang?
Abstain.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
George Familet?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
And Alicia Verhel.
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay, we're going to go to agenda item 12B2. And Ms. Reed is going to discuss staff responses to the State Board of Accountancy's focus questions.
Okay, the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA with staff responses to the NASBA focus questions, which were submitted to NASBA on January 7th, 2019. The responses assist the NASBA regional directors with staying apprised of each state's policies and procedures and to see where improvements or adjustments might be made. Staff did make an edit to question 4, page 3, the third bullet, regarding data received that raised concern regarding peer reviewer population. The ratio of enrolled accounting firms to active peer reviews nationally should be 14.65 to 1. We initially omitted the 1 on that. No action is required on this agenda item unless the CBA would like additional information provided to NASBA on the questions. And at this time, I would like to turn it back over to President Famila and would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the members? Okay, with that, that concludes that agenda item. We're going to then, if we can get through before lunch, item 12B, 3B, the Diversity Committee. Ms. Nicholson.
Diversity Committee has not met, so no report.
Okay, there is no report. Okay. All right, well, we're done with that item. I think that will conclude what we can get through, unless my checklist is, all right. With that, we have a time-certain return at 1:30. We will be going directly into a petition hearing, so we will need to be ready to go at 1:30. This concludes this meeting. Thank you. I want to call the board back into session. Our first item, we are going to hear a petition hearing. And so I am going to turn it over to Judge Wong, and he is going to administer the next item on our agenda for the petition hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and go on the record. We're here on the record before the California Board of Accountancy in the matter of the petition for reinstatement and early termination of penalty of Paul Franklin Spann, S-P-A-N-N. It's OAH number 2018-100-578. My name's Corin Wong. I'm an administrative law judge with the Office of Administrative Hearings. Counsel, may I have you state your appearance for the record, please?
Yes, good morning, Your Honor and members of the board. I am Deputy Attorney General Carl Sani, appearing here on behalf of the Attorney General for the people of the state of California, pursuant to Business and Professions Code Section 5115.
Good afternoon. And sir, are you Paul Franklin Spann?
I am.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. And just for the record, to establish a quorum, can I have the members of the board state their names for the record, starting with the member to my far left?
Carola Nicholson.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Dan Jacobson.
Sochi Leon.
Mary Jiang.
Alicia Burhow.
Nancy Corrigan.
Mark Silverman. George Family.
Deirdre Robinson.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Jose Campos.
Michael Savoy.
Okay, let the record reflect that a quorum is present. So, Mr. Spann, we spoke briefly before we went on the record, and I met you and Mr. Soni, and I think Mr. Soni kind of talked to you a little bit about the procedure. And so just to refresh your recollection, in case you've forgotten or you're a little nervous, in a moment I'll have Mr. Soni present the documents, the petition packet, and then he'll provide a brief summary of the prior discipline and why we're here. And then we'll turn it over to you. I'll swear you in, and then you could provide your testimony and any documents you may have. And then Mr. Soni will have a chance to ask you questions, and then the board members will have a chance to ask you questions if they have any. And then after we finish that round, so to speak, I'll go back to you and ask if there's anything else you would like to say, and we kind of do that round the table format until everybody's had a chance to ask all the questions or say everything they would like to say on their behalf. Okay? And for the board members on my far right, the court reporter did ask prior to the hearing, she can't see all the way down this side. So if you do speak on the record, if you could remember to state your name prior to speaking, that would be greatly appreciated to make a clear record. And if you forget, you know, we'll work it out, but if you could kind of keep that in mind, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, Mr. Soni, would you like to introduce the packet and provide your summary statement?
Yes, thank you very much, Your Honor. Again, members of the board, I would like to first mark for identification and offer into evidence as Exhibit 1 the original packet seeking early termination of probation and elimination of the prohibition on attestation agreements, and offer that into evidence along with the accompanying documents that are attached to the petition.
Okay, those documents will be marked collectively as Exhibit 1 for identification. Mr. Spam, any objection to Exhibit 1 being admitted for all purposes?
No.
Okay, 1 is so admitted.
Okay, Your Honor, and these, both the petitioner and members of the board have been provided a copy of these documents. They number 52 pages and have been identified in the footer as bearing numbers PFS-PET 001 to 52. And during the course of the proceedings, I will probably refer to page numbers simply by the PET and the number of the page. Mr. Span received his certificate number 80909 on March 27th, 2001, and information regarding his license history can be found at the back of the packet at pages 51 and 52. A summary of the case is set forth in Mr. Franzella's cover memorandum, which describes the documents that compose the petition and briefly summarizes the history of that. Rather than go into great detail about the disciplinary history, I would refer the board members to PET 001 to 002. In substance, the accusation alleged 3 causes of action, 2 arising from the failure of Mr. Span to have audit documentation for audit services that he provided. Then the 3rd cause of action dealt with his failure to abide or to comply with the peer review requirements in place at the time of this matter. The stipulated settlement had 2 components to it. It put Mr. Span on probation for a period of 3 years, subject to various terms and conditions. Among the terms and conditions for the 3 years of probation was that Mr. Span would be precluded during the period of probation from performing any attestation work such as audits, reviews, and compilations. The stipulated settlement and disciplinary order had a separate additional order in it, which is found at the end of the board's decision, and that was a requirement that stated that Mr. Span would be permanently prohibited from performing audits, reviews, compilations, and other attestation services for the remainder of his licensure, unless he should come before the board and seek relief from that. That's the same type of provision that the legislature put in for cases that go to hearing about 2 years ago. That's now found in Business and Professions Code section, I believe it is 5000.2, but it enables the board to permanently restrict a license even separate and apart from probation. Mr. Span's petition then seeks 2 things. It seeks, 1, the early termination of probation, which started in, I believe, August of 2017, so a little over almost a year and a half ago. And so he seeks to terminate probation about a year and a half early. And then he also seeks to have the permanent restriction on his ability to do attestation engagements eliminated. And so that brings us to the petition at hand, and at this time, Your Honor, I would request that the witness be sworn.
Okay, Mr. Span, if I could have you stand and raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you will provide in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, please have a seat. And if you would start by stating and spelling your full name for the record.
Paul Spann, Paulspann.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Spann, so now's your chance to provide your testimony, and so you're free to testify in narrative form. The one thing I would ask is that when we talk in narrative form, it's often very common for us to speak a little faster than normal, but we do have a court reporter here taking down your testimony, so I ask that you keep that in mind and keep the pace of your testimony at a slower rate, if you would. Okay, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, I really don't have a opening statement to make. This is all new to me, and I'm very nervous, to be quite honest with you. I realize this matter was brought by the U.S. Department of Labor regarding the audit that I had performed for a Lindora retirement savings plan. And so I think it would be easier for me if I, answered questions as the Attorney General suggested as a format.
Okay, and so, and as I mentioned earlier, you will have at least one more opportunity to provide any additional testimony if you think of anything that you haven't said in the meantime, okay?
Okay.
Mr. Soni, any questions?
Sure. Mr. Spann, I appreciate that you are nervous, and we had an opportunity to speak for a number of minutes before we began here today, correct?
Correct.
And I was able to review with you not just the process, but some of the questions I would be posing?
Correct.
Okay. One of the issues you just raised was you understand that the genesis of the Board of Accountancy's disciplinary complaint, its accusation against you, arose after the Department of Labor referred a deficient audit to the California Board of Accountancy for action and investigation, correct?
Correct.
And you understand that and you were copied on that referral by the Department of Labor, correct?
Correct.
And it raised questions regarding whether or not the audit had been properly planned, sufficient internal controls, a variety of deficiencies that they noted, correct?
Correct.
And thereafter, the Board of Accountancy sent you a letter that I think I showed you beforehand, where they made various requests for documentation and information about this audit, correct?
Correct.
And one of the questions they posed was why you had not engaged in peer review, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's sort of the background of what ultimately became the accusation, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And I understand that since 2011, 2012, you have not performed any audits, is that correct?
Correct.
During the 6 or 7 years since then, have you worked with any firms, other CPAs, in assisting them on any audit or attestation engagements?
I have not.
Okay, and same for reviews and compilations and so forth?
Correct. I do work in the accounting side of client base as far as, bookkeeping.
Okay. And, in fairness to you, since you've asked me to ask these questions, you do have a background, I think, at one of the larger firms?
I do. I was in the...
Why don't you state your background?
Okay. My background was working with smaller size firms in order to get my CPA license. During that time, I had to be, work in the audit department. So one of the firms I worked for was Moss Adams, where I obtained my CPA license, and I was actually in the audit and attest service department and worked my way up to audit manager for that firm in the auto dealership, construction, and general consulting niche.
And then what years were these?
I believe I had quit working there in '02. I think. I'm sorry, I didn't bring that with me.
Okay.
It's been a while.
You were licensed in 2001, correct?
Correct.
So you were working for Moss Adams before you got your license, correct?
Before and then during to get my audit hours.
Okay. And you got all your audit hours and got what is commonly referred to as an A license?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
A license being the capability of performing attestation work.
Correct.
Okay. What's the nature of the work that you've done since then?
The nature of the work I've done since then is more tax-related, tax planning, and also I've remained in the accounting, bookkeeping side of clients as well. I don't, issue reports or financial statements, but I'm also in the financial analysis as far as looking at their numbers and helping them make decisions based on the financial results.
Okay, now you have filed your petition to first terminate, let's go over each part of your petition. First, you've asked that your petition, your probation be terminated early. Can you just explain in your own words why you think after about halfway through probation, you believe that probation ought to be terminated?
Well, I've been able to use this experience and disciplinary action to be proactive in my current practice. Some of the reasons, for my lack of being able to produce work papers and such was a failure in, protecting my computer system. I've been able to take that experience and move it into my tax practice to where I'm having, 3 different systems as far as protecting my clients' work papers. Paper, a backup system that I rotate, and I also use a cloud backup secured file site as well. So I've been able to use my experience in this process to adapt it to my current practice.
Thank you. And can you explain just historically, you did not go through peer review in whatever it was, 2011 or 12. Had you previously gone through peer review?
I had not. We went through internal peer review at Moss Adams. They would go through office to office and do different internal peer reviews. And the reason I didn't go through peer review is I incorrectly assumed, which I shouldn't have done, that a limited scope audit wasn't subject to peer review. My reason for that was during the internal peer review selection process of the firm, they never selected limited scope, these pension plan audits. Again, it was my error. I'm not saying that they never did review those internally. It was just what I had seen, and I made the incorrect assumption that they weren't subject to peer review.
You understand the value of peer review, which is to ensure that a practitioner with an A license is competently and safely performing attestation engagements, correct?
I do. And to even go a little bit further, after I was, on my own as a sole practitioner, I turned down jobs for reviews and audits knowing that they did go through peer review, and I wasn't going to go through that process at the time because that was not part of my business plan, to seek out attest services.
And you now understand that those types of engagements that you engaged in and submitted to the Department of Labor are in fact subject to peer review, correct?
Yes.
In your petition packet at page PET 10, and you have that? In the very bottom paragraph, you reference, I'm gathering and understanding that you might have had or were concerned about whether a P10 or an IRS audit effectively would be prohibit you from being listed by the IRS in its directory because of the disciplinary nature, or the disciplinary order that the CBA imposed, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and you now understand that your understanding or your concern is not well-founded?
No, I am, but this statement came about when I received a letter from the IRS regarding that my P10 would not be listed in their directory because I was on probation. The agent on the phone, again, it's not authority, I understand that, but it just got me concerned with the agent on the phone made the clear statement that since I'm barred from performing audits, that I may have a trouble representing a client during a tax audit. And I explained to the agent on the phone that attest audits are different than tax audits, And I didn't get into an argument with her, but she was on her side saying that she felt I may have trouble, and that's only where that statement came from.
But you now understand that
I
you
do.
can be listed, and that's not an impediment,
Right,
correct?
correct.
Okay, thank you. And you had told the Department of Labor back, I think in 2012, that you did not intend to perform any more audits, is that correct?
Yeah, I don't.
Now, you didn't submit any letters of recommendation of other practitioners who know you and have worked with you or seen your work. Are there any letters that you brought with you or any other evidence that you have?
No, I don't currently work with any practitioners at the moment.
Okay, and during the past 6 years, you have not worked with anyone to assist them in audits?
No.
Okay. That's all the questions I have at this point, Your Honor.
Okay, are there any questions from the board?
Yes, Michael Savoy. I see that one of the causes of discipline was the failure to be able to produce work papers. And I understand that's a computer glitch. But it first came back as a deficient audit, which had nothing to do with work papers. There were certain deficiencies in the audit that you performed, probably because you hadn't done many of these. If you get your A license back, what exactly will you be doing to ensure the public is protected, since it's been years since you've done any A&A work?
I've continued to get my continuing education in the A&A field, even though I'm not subject to or performing that type of work. The other thing I would seek out and be proactive with is working with other CPAs in order to get that experience needed, and being proactive in doing that before I even go out there and say I'm ready to do audits. And so I would be protecting the public's interest in making sure I have that background and that knowledge before I do those on my own. I have no intention, even though I am seeking for full licensure to be restored, I don't have an intention to do a compilation or review or audit or a test service at this time. But I would definitely go through that process to make sure I have full knowledge and full process and the support of another CPA or firm to do that.
Thank you. No further questions.
This is Jose Campos. What is the reason that you would like your probation terminated early?
The reason I would like the probation terminated early is I feel like I have been rehabilitated through this process and been able to turn this into a positive approach to my practice by putting in those safeguards and looking at what I was deficient in and actually doing the right thing going forward.
Are you precluded from doing certain things now that, because of the probation?
Because of the probation, no. I don't feel I am.
Okay. So I saw the discussion regarding the understanding about being permanently restricted as to audits and what it might mean on the tax side. Is there any other reason that you wouldn't be, putting that issue aside, does probation by itself preclude you from being listed on this tax P10?
The P10 directory, from my understanding, based on my communication with the IRS and the letter I received, I cannot be listed on that directory until probation is complete.
Until probation is complete?
Yeah.
Okay. And your priority, between the two requests that you've made, one is, probation and the other one is the permanent restriction, does one of those requests have priority over the other in your mind?
In my mind, no, to be honest with you. I would actually like both equally to be terminated.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name's Luz Molina Lopez. Regarding the audit that is deficient, that we know now is deficient, was that the first audit that you had performed as a sole proprietor?
No, I think that was the second.
Okay. And then before you came to find that the audit was deficient, did you do any other audits after that?
No, I had not done any other audits.
So as a sole proprietor, you have done a total of 2 audits?
Yeah.
And you don't plan to do audits with a full license, however, you wish to keep that window open should you change your mind later?
Correct. I want to be able to have my future opportunities open to me because I do see the tax side of my practice changing. I've always stayed in the bookkeeping accounting side. I have lost current clients in the past 3 years because I do not perform reviews or audits, and they did seek that service, and I said I cannot do that. They actually wished at that time to have the same firm perform both tax and the attest service. Like I said, though, should I have my license fully restored and that opportunity arises, I need to make sure I have the background and the knowledge and the current support in order to perform that engagement. So I'm not going to, even with a full license restoration, I'm not just going to say, oh, I can do a compilation or review or audit. I need to make sure I have that knowledge.
Thank you.
So, point of clarification on the P10. You have a P10, you just can't be listed on the on the website?
Correct. Correct. They did not revoke my P10. It just can't be listed on the public directory.
Okay. And so currently, right now, is the majority of your practice tax work?
Correct, it's tax.
Okay. No further questions?
No question.
Questions?
No questions.
Mary Jiang. So I understand your desire to get back your full, ability on your CPA license. And so if you say, should you desire to do some audits or compilation or review, right now you're taking the AA class to help you stay current. But how are you going to find the support or experience to do some of these engagements? So do you have some alignment with some CPA that could work with you or train you or teach you proper ways?
What my thought process would be to do is use the Cal Society CPA's website, the peer review directory. I've gone through that several times, and I would begin that process to talk with a peer review firm. Then locally, I have sought out probably about 5 different CPA firms that are local who perform the audit and attest services, and I would begin to align myself with that, one of those partners there in the audit and attest service.
No questions.
I have no questions.
No questions.
I have a question, Carola Nicholson. You've presented some education in order to renew your license before your July deadline. The last class you've attended was in September of 2018. Have you attended any more education? Okay.
I have. I didn't bring a list with me, though.
Okay.
Yes.
So you will have the required hours in order to.
Oh, correct. I make sure I have enough hours for each period that I'm subject to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Span, this is your opportunity to provide any additional testimony you would like to provide if anything's come to mind. Is there anything?
Could I have a couple follow-up questions based on the board members?
I was going to go to Mr. Span and then
Okay,
follow up with you.
thank you.
If that's okay. Mr. Span, if there's anything else you'd like to add on your behalf?
No, I just want to thank you for your time, and I do appreciate you listening to my testimony. The only thing which hopefully I was able to communicate is if by chance I do have my license fully restored, I will seek the proper guidance from an existing CPA partner before I do an attest service. I'm not looking to just go out and do that without the proper education and the support.
right, thank you. Mr. Soni?
Just a follow-up question on these P10 questions that you were asked. In your petition, you said you were not 100% certain this IRS agent was correct. Did you bring the letter with you?
No, I could send it in. I think I do have it still.
You don't have it with you
Not
to
with me,
submit?
no.
Okay. And you understand you can continue to use your P10, correct?
Oh, correct. And she didn't make it sound like I couldn't use my P10. It was, I'm not listed on the directory. Then she made the comment, which I don't feel is 100% correct, and you showed me that she was incorrect, where she said I couldn't represent a client in an audit, a tax audit.
Did she give you a regulation by which you can't be listed in this P10 directory? So you don't know what the basis of that is? Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, anything further from the board? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Soni, do you wish to give a summary closing statement?
Yes, I believe most of the topics have been covered. The burden of proof in petitions of this character is clear and convincing evidence. Some cases even use the word to a reasonable certainty that the person should be granted reinstatement of privileges such as the attestation work and termination of probation. And Mr. Span's packet doesn't really have anything more than the continuing education statements that he's provided in his 2 explanatory letters. And so that is the evidence that the board needs to consider as to whether it meets that level of, that high level of certitude that the public will be adequately protected if probation is terminated and Mr. Span's rights to perform attestation work is reinstated. And I'm not here to make a recommendation, but I think that's the body of evidence. Certainly, Mr. Span wants to, and I do think as to his expression that if he got his license back, he would associate himself and become knowledgeable and work with an experienced CPA, that's something that he could do now and could have done for the last 6 years. He couldn't sign an audit, but he could certainly participate under the supervision of another CPA in performing services for the purposes of an audit or other attestation work. And that type of experience or letters of recommendation are not before the board at this time. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Span, do you wish to give a closing argument?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right, so the matter submitted, the record's closed, and we're off the record. So
Okay, I'll call the board back into session. We are going to continue on with our agenda with item 10A, and we are going to have Ms. Corrigan present the Enforcement Program Oversight Committee discussion.
Yes. So we met this morning, and staff reported on proposed changes to Title 16, California Regulations, Section 98, Disciplinary Guidelines and Model Orders, Section 99, Substantial Relationship Criteria, and Section 99.1, Rehabilitation Criteria for denials, suspensions, revocations, restorations, reduction of penalty. Because of some new terminology, other possible changes coming out very recently, and some items that we have directed staff to continue to work on, we don't have a recommendation at this time for the board, but we will have at the March meeting. At that time, we'll have a few of the definitions and other things that have just recently come up, as recently as Friday and Monday, so that those can be ironed out before ready to move forward on that item. And I don't know if there are any questions for me regarding the EPOC meeting, but that is my report.
Okay, thank you. The next item of business then is 10B, and the Legislative Committee, and Ms. Lopez is going to give us a update on the Legislative Committee.
Thank you, President Familet. This morning, the Legislative Committee did meet at the start of the day. The topics that were covered include 10B2, which is an overview of the California legislative and regulatory process and the Legislative Committee's role. Staff reported that the purpose of this agenda item was to present information regarding the legislative and regulatory process and the role of the CBA and Legislative Committee. Staff also noted that the rulemaking process described generally applies to all state agencies. No action was necessary on this item. For the next item, 10B3, this was an update on legislative proposal for inclusion in the 2019 annual omnibus bill, Business and Professions Code Section 5100.1, determining discipline, certified or true and correct copies of action. Staff reported that the purpose of this item was to provide the CBA with information regarding language proposed for inclusion in the Senate Committee on Business Professions and Economic Development's 2019 Omnibus Bill. During its November 2017 meeting, the CBA approved a proposal to require the CBA to rely on certified or true and correct copies of disciplinary or other action as conclusive evidence for the purpose of determining discipline. That proposal was approved by the legislator within a newly added Business and Professions Code, BPC section 5100.1. Staff described the new language recently submitted to the legislator, which would replace the term subsections with subdivisions, to refer to the specific causes for discipline discussed in Business and Professions Code section 5100D, H, and L. This proposal does not affect how this code section operates. It essentially is just replacing the word subsections with subdivisions. And no action was necessary on this item. Next, 10B4, there was an update on the California Board of Accountancy's sunset review. Staff stated that the purpose of this item was to provide the CBA with an update on the process and timelines of the CBA's upcoming sunset review. Since the November 2018 CBA meeting, staff have been working with the governor's administration and legislature to help ensure a smooth and successful sunset review. Staff reported a productive conversation held last week regarding language the CBA included within its sunset report to address concerns with the implementation of AB 2138. The CBA's sunset review hearing is scheduled for Tuesday, February 26th. Later this month, staff expect to receive certain questions from the legislator regarding the CBA's sunset report or seek clarification of matters relating to the CBA's operations. During that hearing, the CBA will provide testimony and answer questions on topics identified prior to the hearing. In March or April, legislation to extend the CBA's sunset, including other statutory changes requested by the legislature or the CBA, will be heard in the Assembly Business and Professions Committee. No action was necessary on this item. Next, we covered item 10B5A through F, review and possible consideration of positions on legislation the CBA is monitoring. Staff reported that the legislature returned to session last month and that bills are being introduced for consideration in the 2019-2020 legislative session. Staff noted that items A through F are either spot bills or bills related to the cannabis industry, which are items the CBA has directed staff to monitor. The Legislative Committee did not take action on these items. Item 10B5G regarding Senate Bill 51, Financial Institutions Cannabis. Staff stated that SB 51 would establish cannabis limited charter banks and cannabis limited charter credit unions to provide specific financial services to the cannabis industry. Due to current federal law, businesses engaged in the cannabis industry are generally unable to engage in federally assured financial institutions. The CBA took a watch position on SB 930 from last year, which is nearly identical to this bill, SB 51. Staff noted that the bill directs the California Department of Business Oversight to establish regulations and regulate these new banks and credit unions, including a requirement to obtain private insurance. Further, the author's office indicated their desire to work with the CBA to resolve any concerns the CBA may have. Staff recommended a watch position consistent with the past CBA's position on SB 930. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take a watch position on Senate Bill 51. Is it necessary to take a motion right now? That is a motion.
So we just have to vote? Okay.
Well, I have a discussion,
Questions, comments?
a comment. I'm going to vote against the motion because I think that 51, I think it's SB 50, or AB 51. SB 51, I'm sorry. It should be supported. California has chosen to legalize the sale of cannabis. These people have to deal in cash. It's extremely dangerous for them to deal in cash. They've got, tons of money there, and what are they going to do with it? But as to our responsibility as the Board of Accountancy, how are the accountants going to keep track of all this cash? And where is it? You have to have a paper trail. Well, the paper is Benjamin's, and it's not. And so I think this was originally John Chung's idea to have at least one cannabis bank when he was treasurer just a few weeks ago, and for accountants to do this properly, and to I think that it's inconsistent for the accountants to be able to do this properly, including account for the payment of income tax, because even though it's a federal crime, you have to pay income tax. The federal law requires that you pay income tax on this stuff. I think that the accountants have to have the money put into a bank, and then the checks that you can get from that bank are for very limited purposes, like paying your taxes, I think, and paying your rent and that sort of thing. And so I think support the position is correct.
Okay.
Just real quick, I personally, I agree with you 100%. I do agree with the watch position only because the bill filled for a reason. And I like the idea that the author is coming to us going, how can we work together to ensure that our accountants have what they need in order to do this job, what we need to do to establish a bank, or have, not us, but having a cannabis bank put together. So I think for us, it's just kind of like, hey, let's see what you got and go from there. I personally would love to see this happen, and we still might. But I like the watch position because nothing's changed at this moment. I want to see what they bring forward.
Okay, let's have a vote.
All right. Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Famulett?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Mary Jiang?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
No.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson?
Abstain.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
And Mark Silverman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Should I
we are
continue?
going
There's
to-
one more on the ledge
Oh, there's
committee.
one more. Sorry. My bad.
So this is the last piece that we covered. This is item 10B5H. This was regarding Senate Bill 53, open meetings. Staff indicated that SB 53 would subject state two-member advisory committees to the requirements of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which includes publishing a 10-day meeting notice and agenda, opening the meeting to the public, recording the meeting, and publishing minutes. Staff reported that the CBA and its committees use 2-member advisory committees to conduct research and investigate various items and report back to the public in a public meeting. An advisory committee may not take independent action. In addition, the CBA's outreach and communication programs that include more than one CBA member could be impacted by this bill, as those activities may constitute a meeting and therefore be subject to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. According to the author, local government bodies are already subject to this requirement and believe it is appropriate to extend the same requirement to state bodies. In addition, the author's staff believes that certain state bodies may be conducting business in closed meetings that should be held in open. Staff explained that SB 53 is a reintroduction of AB 85 from 2015 and a very similar bill to AB 2058 from 2014. Both of those bills passed the legislature unanimously, but were vetoed by Governor Brown. The CBA adopted an opposed position to both of those passed bills. Staff recommended the CBA to take an opposed position again on this bill, SB 53. Following the Legislative Committee's meeting, staff spoke with the author's office, who indicated their willingness to consider amendments proposed by the CBA. The Legislative Committee recommends that the CBA take an opposed position to Senate Bill 53.
Member comments? Comments from the public? Let's call for a vote.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos, and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for your report. We are going to go to agenda item 13A and ask for any public comments. Absent any comments, agenda item 13B, agenda items for future Board of Accountancy meetings.
I have brought this up last year and said that I bring it up this year when the language was clear as to what the language was clear. And that said, I think we need to, this board hasn't since 2014 reviewed the legal meaning of substantial relationship, and I would like that to be placed on an agenda for, as is, George, as is convenient for you and Patty, I would suggest it for next month, and I plan to submit a memo to my fellow board members explaining my reasoning for my thinking, and would invite others to do the same.
Okay.
I just want to ask, along those lines, do you think there are other boards or other departments or other places we should seek either presentations or advice or counsel about this, having a discussion around substantially related, like, and you're submitting a memo about it, maybe you could include, like, who might be appropriate to write a history of it, who might be appropriate to, discuss the implications of changing it, like, just what that conversation would look like.
I would definitely, different boards are governed by different statutes. So, for instance, the lawyers have what do you call it?
I don't think we can get into discussion on the topic. I mean, so you got a topic
That's
for
fine.
future
Yeah.
meeting.
No,
Let's
I-
just log it.
What I'm saying is, and I appreciate that, is that they have different things, and I would include that in the memo, yes. And the Attorney General's office has decided that it does not want to participate in this.
Okay, we will, any other items?
Yes, something very quickly. Dan, if you're going to do a memo, it should go to board staff, and it will be when it becomes part of an agenda, it will be part of the meeting materials
That would be great.
instead of going to the board members.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, any other items? All right, well, that concludes the board open public session. We are going to go into closed session. Thank you very much. Opening public session to the California Board of Accountancy. With no further matters, we are going to adjourn the meeting today.